Welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. I know you're here to fall asleep. But before we begin, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Also, do you like the anime-style visuals, or should I go more serious? Let's begin. In May 2023, Spanish police received a distressing call from a quiet neighborhood in Malaga. In one of the apartments, they discovered the body of a young woman with multiple stab wounds. The suspect fled the scene but was apprehended hours later at a local cafe. However, this tragedy was only the beginning of a series of events that led investigators to an unsolved case from 9 years prior. Behind the wall of another apartment, they found something that shocked even the most experienced forensic experts. In 2011, Sabora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco in Spain, in the Laurel neighborhood near the beaches of Torremolinos. On the surface, their life seemed stable. Sabora worked as a waitress in a local restaurant while Marco worked as a chef. They rented a small house and Sabora often called her mother, Elisabetta, assuring her that everything was fine. However, behind this appearance of stability lay serious problems that became more evident with each passing month. When Elisabetta came to Spain to visit her daughter, she immediately noticed the tense atmosphere in the home. Arguments between Sabora and Marco broke out even in her presence. Elisabetta saw how her daughter tried to justify Marco's bursts of jealousy and tension, blaming them on temporary difficulties. However, Elisabetta was convinced that the problems went far beyond day-to-day struggles. It was hard to believe that just 2 years earlier, Sabora had been a completely different person. Born on September 14, 1991, in Tirana, Albania, she was known from a young age for her lively and cheerful personality. After her parents divorced, her mother Elisabetta moved with her children to Italy, where they started a new life. In Rome, Sabora quickly became popular with those around her. Her classmates gave her the nickname Sibi, highlighting her energy and friendliness. Despite financial challenges, Sabora was eager to support her family from a young age. She started working as a waitress in a local cafe, but never gave up on her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a regional beauty contest opened the door to opportunities in the modeling world. Despite this, her biggest dream was to become a teacher, as Sabora genuinely loved working with children. Things began to change when Sabora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately caught her attention. At the time, she knew little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed to want to start a new chapter in life. However, behind this facade lay a complicated past. Marco was known for his aggressive behavior and problems with controlled substances, which had brought him to the attention of the police on multiple occasions. Sabora, captivated by his charisma, chose to overlook these warning signs. A year into their relationship, Marco suggested that Sabora move with him to Spain, claiming there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to dissuade her daughter, doubting Marco's intentions, but Sabora insisted. She believed this move would mark the beginning of a new chapter where she and Marco could build a happy life together. At first, things in Spain seemed promising. Sabora quickly found work as a waitress, and Marco got a job as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sabora shared her plans with her mother, sounding optimistic about the future. However, their stability was short-lived. Marco began losing one job after another, blaming his employers for his failures. His irritability and jealousy grew more pronounced, and his aggressive behavior escalated from minor incidents into serious conflicts. When Elisabetta traveled to Spain to see how her daughter was doing, she was shocked by what she found. Sabora, once lively and confident, now seemed withdrawn and subdued. Marco didn't even try to hide his irritation in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments grew louder, but despite the clear issues, Sabora continued to defend Marco, assuring her mother that things would improve. Why Sabora chose to overlook these red flags puzzled those close to her. Perhaps she sought in Marco the support and stability she had lacked in her early years. Her family, having moved from Albania to Italy, had endured tough times. Elisabetta worked tirelessly to provide a better life for her children, but Sabora faced the need to shoulder responsibility at an early age. Her relationship with Marco might have been an attempt to fill that void, but instead, it only brought more strain. Life in Spain was increasingly becoming a struggle for Sabora, as the bright dreams of her youth gradually faded into distant memories. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani disappeared suddenly, leaving her family in anguish. The last known contact she had was a text message to Marco, her former partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was turned off and her social media accounts went silent. This behavior was uncharacteristic of her. Prior to that, Sabora had informed her mother that she had finally ended things with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt liberated. She described it as feeling like a butterfly that had just emerged from its cocoon. But her sudden silence alarmed everyone. The situation took an even stranger turn when Marco unexpectedly appeared at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to present himself as a concerned and regretful man, pretending to care deeply about what had happened. Over coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora could have gone. According to Marco, they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had walked out, leaving all her belongings behind. Later, Marco changed his story, claiming that a security guard at their apartment complex had supposedly seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These conflicting statements only deepened suspicions and heightened concerns. Elisabetta recalled that just a month prior, Sabora had shared her decision to end the relationship for good. After 3 years of trying to salvage it, she had moved out of Marco's apartment and was working on rebuilding her life. During that time, she tried to distance herself from him, but it seemed this did little to stop his interest in her life. Marco continued to involve himself, showing an unsettling persistence. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta, asking if Sabora had returned to Italy. The question struck Elisabetta as odd, especially given their recent breakup. Sabora had made multiple attempts to cut ties with Marco. In 2013, she even returned to her mother's home in Italy, determined to leave everything behind. During that time, she admitted she no longer saw a future in their relationship. But Marco refused to let go. He showed up at their house in Italy, pleading with Sabora and promising to change. He even proposed to her. Worn out from the constant struggle, Sabora gave in to his promises. But the cycle soon resumed. Jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior began to destroy her sense of peace once again. At one point, she confided in her mother that if she ever decided to leave Marco for good, she might have to completely disappear, as she believed he wouldn't leave her alone. Over the following months, Sabora traveled frequently to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports suggesting she used a forged Italian ID for her travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter seemed increasingly frightened, but Sabora rarely shared details. She only mentioned that she was searching for a way out of her difficult situation. By June 2014, Sabora had moved into a new apartment, trying to start fresh. She told her mother she had no intention of ever returning to Marco. For a short time, she seemed to regain a sense of freedom, but concerns about her safety lingered. When Marco claimed that she had left and abandoned all her belongings, her family immediately knew something was wrong. Sabora would never have severed contact with her family, especially not with her mother and brothers. Now the family could only wait, hoping that Sabora had indeed decided to go into hiding to escape Marco's control. Yet the conflicting accounts and complete lack of communication from her only raised more questions. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora Gagani's disappearance had made no significant progress despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Elisabetta, her mother, had been the driving force behind filing an official report with the authorities. She remained convinced that Marco, Sabora's former partner, was somehow involved, as he was the last known person to have seen her before she vanished. However, his behavior throughout the investigation only raised more suspicions. During questioning, Marco repeated his version of events. He claimed that Sabora had left their home after an argument, taking only a few belongings. However, many of her personal items, including clothing and identification documents, were still in the apartment, which seemed unusual. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her disappearance to the police. Instead, he insisted he tried to locate Sabora on his own, printing and distributing flyers around their neighborhood. He also offered conflicting theories about her whereabouts, suggesting at one point that she might have traveled to Argentina, or that she had been seen with an unknown man with whom she supposedly had a confrontation. These statements lacked consistency and factual support. Elisabetta, distrustful of Marco, began her own efforts to find her daughter. She reached out to the media and a specialized organization that helps publicize cases of missing persons. Photos of Sabora and calls for assistance began appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. Despite these efforts, no new leads were uncovered. While Sabora's family continued their search for answers, Marco appeared to lead a relatively ordinary life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, seemingly trying to avoid attracting attention. During this time, he entered new relationships, but both ended with complaints from the women about his aggressive behavior. Still, Marco remained in Spain, frequently visiting the gym and joining a shooting club, which alarmed those aware of his history. Sabora's family refused to give up. Elisabetta repeatedly appealed to the police, urging them to intensify their investigation. Meanwhile, law enforcement began reviewing the case files, searching for any overlooked details. They scrutinized Marco's statements, which had appeared inconsistent from the beginning. His claim that Sabora left with suitcases conflicted with his assertion that she had walked out with nothing. Additionally, questions arose about why he had not contacted the police immediately after her disappearance. Over time, public interest in Sabora's case began to fade. Despite her family's persistent efforts, Marco, still living in Spain, seemed to adjust to life following her disappearance. To his neighbors, he appeared to be a friendly individual who was focused on fitness and socializing. However, his past relationship with Sabora and the complaints from new partners continued to cast doubt on his character. As Sabora's family clung to hope for any news, the investigation remained at a standstill. Authorities expanded their efforts, utilizing international missing persons databases, but these measures yielded no results. For those closest to Sabora, the uncertainty surrounding her fate remained an unbearable ordeal. By 2023, Marco appeared to have turned his life around on the surface. He was living with a new partner named Paula, and they had a child together. However, beneath the facade of this seemingly fresh start were the same issues that had plagued Marco for years. His relationship with Paula was far from stable. She confided to close friends and co-workers that she experienced physical mistreatment from Marco. Meanwhile, Marco struggled to keep a steady job, which only worsened their financial troubles. While working at a pizzeria, Marco met Victor Molina, the restaurant owner, who eventually offered jobs to both him and Paula. Victor also rented the couple a small apartment, hoping to ease their financial difficulties. Unlike Marco, Paula quickly earned trust and respect at work. Victor and his sister Victoria, who also worked at the restaurant, became not only Paula's employers, but also a source of emotional support. Over time, Victoria learned more about the difficulties in Paula and Marco's relationship. After one particular incident, she began urging Paula to contact the police. According to Victoria, Marco was not only aggressive at work, but also provided no help at home. An incident at the restaurant marked a breaking point for Victor. The door to the staff restroom was found broken. Victoria learned from Paula that Marco had damaged it, accusing her of using the space to meet with coworkers. Following this, Victor reassigned Marco to a different location, keeping him under close supervision. Despite Paula's hard work and efforts to maintain the appearance of a normal life, she couldn't hide the challenges she faced. Her growing trust in Victoria allowed her to open up more. Paula revealed that she was staying with Marco only because it was the only way she could regain custody of her children, who had been removed from her care after authorities discovered prohibited substances in their home. The substances belonged to Marco, but the consequences had fallen on the entire family. For Paula, this was a deeply personal tragedy, and her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight to regain custody. Meanwhile, Marco's situation continued to deteriorate. He frequently complained to Victor about his financial struggles, claiming he was only working for the sake of his family. Yet his actions and behavior told a different story. His aggression at work and inability to get along with coworkers led Victor to question whether keeping him employed was worth the trouble. At the same time, Victoria, seeing how dire Paula's situation was, continued to encourage her not to tolerate the mistreatment. However, Paula, fearing for her safety, avoided taking any confrontational steps. She admitted to Victoria that Marco had once struck her 4 times and kicked her, but she downplayed the seriousness of the incident. For Victoria and Victor, this was clear evidence that Paula's situation required urgent intervention. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula spent her day off in good spirits, sharing her plans for a relaxing and productive evening with her coworkers. She seemed optimistic and ready to unwind. The following day, May 17th, Victoria, Paula's coworker and close friend, was eager to hear about how her evening had gone. However, the day took a dark and unexpected turn. That morning, at around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting erupted from the apartment Paula shared with Marco. Though arguments between them were common, this time it sounded far more intense. Paula's voice was unmistakable, calling out for help. The commotion was so loud that Victor, Paula's landlord and employer, who happened to be nearby, could hear it clearly. Alarmed, he rushed toward the apartment with another employee from the restaurant. When they reached the door, the 2 men began knocking and shouting, trying to understand what was happening. From inside, they heard faint sobbing, which soon fell silent. Moments later, Marco opened the door. His demeanor was calm as he assured them everything was fine, claiming Paula had simply gone to bed to rest. However, Paula's voice was no longer audible, which deeply unsettled Victor. The situation was made even more concerning by recent events. Just a few days earlier, Victor had fired Marco from the restaurant following a series of troubling incidents, including the unexplained disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had grown increasingly distrustful of Marco and wanted to avoid further problems. Now, Marco found himself at the center of yet another alarming event. Victor left to retrieve a spare key to the apartment, while the other employee called the police. Marco, seemingly aware that the situation was escalating, remained calm but acted unexpectedly. Without any explanation, he left the apartment and walked out the building. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Everything inside appeared as though the occupants had recently left, adding to the growing mystery. Meanwhile, Victor returned with the spare key and entered the apartment to determine what had happened. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body lying on the floor, with multiple stab wounds. Her clothes were soaked in blood, and it was evident that she had passed away several hours earlier. The police immediately secured the scene, called in forensic specialists to collect evidence, and launched a search for Marco, who had fled by that time. Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to confirm the exact cause of death, while investigators worked to track down the suspect. Marco was located just a few hours later, sitting calmly at a table in a local cafe. He showed no resistance during his arrest and behaved as though nothing had happened. On May 20th, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with committing a crime with aggravating circumstances related to gender-based aggression. The court also ordered a psychiatric evaluation and testing for controlled substances. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody. During the hearing, Marco exercised his right to remain silent, speaking only to answer questions from his attorney. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani, whose disappearance he had previously alluded to. However, just days after his arrest, Sabora's name came back into the spotlight. On May 17th, the day of Paula's death, while being interrogated at the station, Marco made an unexpected confession. He claimed that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora Gagani and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Marco even offered to show investigators the exact location of her remains. Despite his confession, law enforcement chose to prioritize the investigation into Paula's death and temporarily delayed verifying Marco's statements about Sabora. For Sabora's mother, Elisabetta, the news of Marco's arrest and his admission regarding her was a devastating blow. For 9 years, She had fought to reopen the investigation, believing Marco was involved in Sabora's disappearance. Following Marco's confession, the case of Sabora Gagani was officially reopened, and investigators began working to verify his claims, starting with an examination of the apartment where the couple had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators focusing on Sabora's case conducted a detailed review of the building's layout where she and Marco had once resided. A thorough search of the apartment yielded no significant findings. However, discrepancies were found between the apartment's physical layout and its blueprints. This discovery shifted the investigators' attention to a neighboring unit on the same floor, which was nearly identical in design. One particular detail stood out. There was a large space that, according to the building plans, should have been part of the bedroom in the apartment under investigation, but it was not present in reality. After obtaining permission, investigators entered the neighboring apartment on June 6th and broke through the wall. Behind it, they discovered a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police uncovered the first set of evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife stained with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among the items was a bouquet of wilted flowers lying atop several plastic bags. Inside one of the bags was a camping sleeping bag which contained human remains. The remains were sent for forensic analysis to determine the identity and cause of death. Investigators noted tattoos on the body that matched descriptions provided in the missing persons report for Sabora Gagani. However, to confirm the identity conclusively, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10th, police arrived at the home of Sabora's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed the remains belonged to Sabora Gagani. In the week following the discovery, new details about Marco's actions emerged in Spain. During interrogations, he claimed to have used acid in an attempt to dispose of the body, though this claim was not substantiated. Investigators noted Marco frequently altered his statements. His confessions following his arrest for Paula's death had prompted the reopening of Sabora's case. Meanwhile, authorities continued to investigate the circumstances surrounding her death. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of Sabora's remains was a devastating blow. 9 years of uncertainty had stripped her of hope, though she had never stopped waiting for answers about her daughter's fate. Over the years, her life had changed dramatically. Sabora's father had passed away from illness, never learning the truth about his daughter, and Elisabetta had found solace only in the birth of her grandson. When the remains were officially identified, Elisabetta reflected on her years of advocacy, repeatedly appealing to the police to reopen her daughter's case. While her efforts had finally brought answers, they also delivered a bittersweet sense of closure. Forensic experts continued to analyze the evidence recovered from the site where Sabora's remains were found. The knife discovered in the plastic bag was sent for forensic testing to identify biological traces that might link it to Marco. Meanwhile, Spanish investigators collaborated with their Italian counterparts to supplement the case materials from Sabora's disappearance. The investigation into Paula's death also remained ongoing, with Marco already the primary suspect. Despite the evidence and Marco's own admission of his involvement in Sabora's death, including revealing the location of her remains, he later retracted his confession. His attorney argued that Marco's statements had been made under duress and should not be admissible in court. However, investigators maintained that the evidence found in a concealed box, including Sabora's personal belongings, provided strong grounds for further charges. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora Gagani's remains, her family was finally able to lay her to rest. After all forensic examinations were completed, her remains were returned to her loved ones for burial. The ceremony took place in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, balloons were released into the sky with heartfelt messages, symbolizing hope and farewell. At the time, most attention was focused on the ongoing legal proceedings against Marco, who faced charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30th, 2024, Marco submitted a handwritten 17-page letter in which admitted responsibility for her death, but included numerous caveats. He claimed that the conflict arose due to accumulated arguments over a 50-euro debt and his infidelity. According to Marco, during the altercation, he defended himself too strongly, which led to the tragedy. However, investigators determined that the wounds on Paula's body were located on her back, casting serious doubt on his self-defense claim. Despite his admissions regarding Paula, Marco refused to provide detailed information about Sabora's case. He did confirm that he had wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, layered it with lime, and sealed it within a wall. However, he denied being responsible for her death, attempting to justify his actions as a reaction to fear of the circumstances. During the trial, Marco abruptly changed his account of Sabora's death, presenting an entirely new version of events. He alleged that the Albanian mafia, which he claimed to have been connected to due to debts, was responsible for her death. According to Marco, he had borrowed 25,000 euros to open a brothel, but the money was stolen. Unable to repay the debt, he said that 4 men came to his home, and during an argument, one of them killed Sabora. Marco claimed he was then forced, under threat to his own life, to dispose of her body to avoid further consequences. This version of events raised significant doubts among investigators, as Marco had previously changed his statements multiple times. Throughout the investigation, it became evident that Marco had used falsehoods to mislead authorities, beginning with his arrest in May 2023 after Paula's death. His claims of mafia involvement were not supported by any evidence gathered during the investigation. The cause of Sabora's death was determined through an autopsy. Multiple stab wounds which, despite the condition of her remains, clearly indicated a violent crime. Sabora's family finally received confirmation of her fate years after she had been reported missing. Elisabetta, her mother, revealed that she had lived the past 9 years clinging to hope for answers, though Sabora's father had passed away without ever learning the truth. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was ongoing. The court decided to proceed with a jury trial to address charges of domestic aggression and homicide. Meanwhile, Sabora Gagani's case, though reopened, had not yet gone to trial. Investigators continued to scrutinize Marco's claims, including his allegations of mafia involvement. Further court proceedings were anticipated. The stories of Sabora Gagani and Paula highlight how destructive relationships, marked by manipulation and abusive behavior, can have devastating consequences. Sabora, who had dreamed of a bright future, and Paula, who was striving to reclaim control of her life, both fell victim to the same person. Their fates serve as a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing the signs of abusive behavior early and intervening to prevent further tragedies. On November 23, 2013, in the Santa Cruz Harbor, California, one of the most influential figures in the tech industry, Forrest Hayes, was found deceased. His body was discovered aboard his luxury yacht, the Escape, which he personally owned. Forrest was found unconscious in one of the cabins, and efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. The first responders were local law enforcement, summoned by the yacht's captain. The discovery of the body was surrounded by several puzzling circumstances. Forrest was found lying on his back, showing no signs of struggle. A noticeable injection mark was visible on his arm, but no syringe or medical supplies were found nearby. This immediately raised questions for investigators, prompting them to consider whether this was an accident or a deliberate act. The cabin where Forrest was found was in disarray. On a small table in front of him were 2 wine glasses, one of which bore lipstick marks, suggesting he had company. All the windows were carefully covered with curtains, and the lighting was dim, creating an air of privacy. The scene seemed oddly staged, yet there were no overt signs of violent behavior. The yacht's captain informed the police that Forrest frequently used the vessel for private outings. He mentioned that while Forrest often enjoyed spending time alone on the yacht, he occasionally entertained guests. However, the captain did not see anyone board or leave the yacht after Forrest embarked on this particular trip. The coroner's initial examination suggested the possibility of an overdose on substances as the cause of death. However, at the onset of the investigation, it was unclear whether this overdose was accidental or intentional. The absence of a syringe near the body raised more questions. Had the syringe been removed intentionally, or was it never there to begin with? In search of leads, investigators began delving into Forrest's life, his contacts, business dealings, personal relationships, and the events leading up to his death. The key question was, who had been with Forrest during the final hours of his life? The wine glass with lipstick and the lack of clear evidence at the scene hinted at the presence of a woman. Yet neither the captain nor the harbor staff reported seeing anyone leave the yacht after Forrest boarded it. The investigation started with an examination of Forrest's phone, which was found near his body. A preliminary review of his apps and messages did not reveal anything suspicious. However, the detectives decided to conduct a deeper dive into his personal life. Despite Forrest's flawless professional reputation, investigators suspected he might have had a hidden side of his life that could offer clues about what had happened. Through a detailed investigation of Forrest's connections and habits, it became evident that his seemingly perfect life might have concealed unexpected secrets. Uncovering these became a primary focus for law enforcement as they worked to understand what transpired aboard the Escape that fateful evening. Forrest Hayes was born on May 10, 1962, in Dearborn, Michigan. From an early age, he displayed remarkable learning abilities. His curiosity, knack for solving complex problems, and natural charisma made him a leader among his peers. Teachers and classmates frequently remarked on his magnetic personality and drive for excellence, qualities that laid the foundation for his future professional success. After graduating high school, Forrest enrolled at a prestigious university where he studied engineering and computer science. He quickly mastered the cutting-edge technologies of the era and began developing his own projects, which caught the attention of major tech companies. His career took off in the early 1980s, a period when the information technology industry was just beginning to flourish. A pivotal moment in Forrest's career came when he joined Apple in 2005. At the time, Apple was undergoing rapid growth and was actively developing groundbreaking products such as the iPhone and iPad. Forrest secured a position in one of the company's key departments, responsible for creating innovative technologies. His contributions to Apple's projects were so significant that he quickly earned the respect of his colleagues and leadership. Forrest was more than just a skilled professional. He was an innovator. He had a rare talent for finding unconventional solutions to complex challenges, making him an indispensable member of the team. Colleagues recalled his relentless drive to implement forward-thinking ideas that enhanced the functionality and accessibility of Apple's products. During his tenure, Forrest worked on technologies that later became industry standards. However, Forrest's ambitions didn't allow him to rest on his laurels. Soon, he accepted an offer from Google, joining the global tech giant in 2007. At Google, he became part of Google X, a division dedicated to developing cutting-edge technologies. His role involved coordinating projects related to autonomous vehicles, smart devices, and other forward-looking innovations. Among his achievements, Forrest contributed to the development of self-driving vehicle systems, a groundbreaking advancement in the field of autonomous transportation. Colleagues described Forrest Hayes as someone who could inspire a team and guide them toward ambitious goals. He was a strict yet fair leader who fostered a healthy work environment. Forrest wasn't afraid to take on the most challenging tasks, earning him the respect and admiration of his team. His ability to combine strategic thinking with attention to detail allowed him to successfully lead large-scale projects that shaped the future of technology. Forrest's professional achievements were deeply intertwined with his family life. In 1996, he married Denise Hayes, forming a strong bond built on mutual understanding and support. The couple had 5 children: Lauren, Daniel, Lily, Roscoe, and Zosia. Forrest was not just a successful businessman. He was also a devoted father. Despite his demanding work schedule, he always made time for his family. According to those close to him, he cherished spending time with his kids, organizing family trips, and creating traditions that brought them closer together. Forrest's family life appeared to be harmonious. Their home, valued at $3 million, was located in one of California's most prestigious neighborhoods, offering a haven of comfort and tranquility. However, Forrest's greatest joy came from outings on his yacht, the Escape. For him, the yacht was more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of family unity. He frequently took his family on short trips, enjoying quality time and relaxation away from the hustle of city life. Colleagues and friends admired Forrest's ability to balance his professional success with his dedication to his family. He served as an example of how to juggle career achievements with personal commitments. His meticulous nature and drive to excel in everything he did left a lasting impression on those around him. Yet, despite the outward harmony, Forrest occasionally confided in close friends about feeling a sense of emptiness. He felt as though he had achieved everything he could dream of, but it didn't bring him complete fulfillment. This restlessness may have been part of what drove him to seek new experiences and interests, which ultimately led to tragic consequences. A significant element of Forrest's secret life was his use of the app Seeking Arrangement. This platform facilitates connections between affluent individuals and younger partners for informal relationships that often involve financial support. Forrest was an active user of the app. An investigation into his account revealed that he had been messaging dozens of women, arranging meetings and negotiating the terms of their interactions. These relationships went beyond casual acquaintances. Forrest was known to generously support his partners, covering their expenses, giving expensive gifts, and arranging meetings in private settings. One of those locations was his yacht, Escape. Initially used as a family vessel for short trips, it eventually became a personal retreat, where Forrest invited women he met through the app. The yacht provided the privacy he needed, allowing him to avoid unwanted attention. The yacht's captain, who worked for Forrest, later told the police that it was often used for such meetings. He recalled that Forrest occasionally took women on short trips or spent several hours alone with them on board. According to the captain, this became a regular occurrence, but he refrained from asking questions as he was bound by a confidentiality agreement. These encounters often involved alcohol and, in some instances, the use of prohibited substances. Messages found on Forrest's phone revealed discussions about acquiring these substances. At times, his partners would bring them along at his request. This revelation shocked his colleagues and family, who were unaware of his double life. Investigators focused particular attention on one woman Forrest had met through Seeking Arrangement. A week before his death, he arranged a meeting with her on the yacht. They spent the evening drinking wine and later used substances that led to Forrest feeling unwell. In messages exchanged after the meeting, Forrest mentioned that he wasn't feeling good, but did not intend to stop engaging in such activities. Forrest's life was divided into two worlds. In one, he was a devoted husband, father, and professional with an impeccable reputation. In the other, he sought thrill and temporary escape from routine. His colleagues and friends had no inkling of this hidden side of him, and his family believed that his trips on the yacht were simply his way of coping with stress. These private meetings, which Forrest saw as a way to unwind from his demanding work schedule, ultimately had tragic consequences. The yacht, once a symbol of his success and freedom, became the setting where his double life collided with his untimely death. The revelations forced investigators and Forrest's loved ones to reconsider their image of a man they had thought to be flawless. Alexandra Catherine Tillman, known as Alex, was born on April 8, 1987 in Canada. Her biological parents were unknown, as she was adopted at an early age by Leslie Ann and Bart Tillman. Her new family provided Alex with a stable and nurturing upbringing, including a comfortable home and financial security. Leslie Ann worked in retail, while Bart held an executive position at a major company, granting the family a high social standing. Alex grew up in a happy environment. She did well at school, especially in literature, and dreamed of becoming a writer. Her teachers recognized her creative thinking and vivid imagination. In addition, she was fond of sports and actively participated in school competitions. Parents were proud of their daughter, invested in her education, and supported her ambitions. However, adolescence was the beginning of a series of problems for Alex. At 14, she tried pot for the first time. It was more of a random decision, but it led to a gradual involvement in the world of the forbidden. At first, it was light substances, but by the age of 16, Alex began to use heavier drugs. During this period, her life changed dramatically. She began to skip classes, left sports sections, and distanced herself from her parents. Leslie Ann and Bart Tillman tried their best to help their daughter. They turned to psychologists, took her to counseling, but the situation continued to deteriorate. In a desperate attempt to remedy the situation, they sent Alex to a private rehabilitation school in Maine. This school was known for its strict approach to educating teens with behavioral problems. The parents hoped that isolation from the familiar environment would help their daughter to return to normal life. However, the stay at the school did not bring the expected results. Alex was unable to adapt to the new environment and soon returned home, where she slipped back into her former lifestyle. By the age of 18, Alex finally dropped out of school. She tried to find herself in various directions, including journalism, but quickly lost interest. Her attempts to succeed were constantly thwarted by a return to medication. She lived in a state of constant struggle with addictions, which did not allow her to establish either her personal or professional life. In 2010, Alex moved to San Francisco. She hoped to start a new chapter of her life by dedicating herself to the entertainment industry. During this period, she created a YouTube channel where she posted videos about makeup and her everyday experiences. However, the project was unsuccessful, and Alex faced disappointment once again. Looking for a way to stand out, she turned to the modeling industry. But realizing that the standard parameters for a successful modeling career did not suit her, Alex chose the niche of fetish photography. She participated in photo shoots in the BDSM style, where the emphasis was placed on espionage and provocation. This choice helped her find her audience, but did not bring financial stability. Alex continued to struggle with addictions, living from order to order and constantly facing challenges. In 2011, Alex began using the Seeking Arrangement platform. This decision became a way for her to connect with affluent partners who could provide her with financial support and access to a more luxurious lifestyle. Through this platform, Alex met Forrest Hayes. Their relationship began with discussions about the terms of their meetings, which was a standard practice on the platform. Forrest was seeking a companion for private get-togethers aboard his yacht, Escape, offering financial assistance and generous gifts in return. For Alex, he represented a chance to achieve the stability she desperately needed. Their meetings were casual and often accompanied by wine and light conversation. However, their interactions soon took on a different dimension. As investigators later discovered, Forrest occasionally requested Alex to bring prohibited substances to their meetings, offering her additional compensation for doing so. Seeing this as an opportunity to earn more, Alex agreed. Their meetings became a regular occurrence, with the yacht Escape serving as their primary meeting place. One of the significant figures from Alex Tillman's past was Dean Riopelle, a musician, businessman, and owner of popular nightclubs in Atlanta. Their relationship began in 2011 and quickly garnered attention due to the considerable age gap between them. Dean was 51 at the time, while Alex was just 24. However, neither of them seemed to mind the difference, fully immersing themselves in an intense and vibrant lifestyle. Dean was not only a successful entrepreneur, but also a passionate rock musician. His clubs were central to Atlanta's music scene, and his band regularly performed at these venues. Dean was known for his charisma, energy, and love for a free-spirited way of life. For Alex, who was searching for both stability and attention, Dean became a prominent figure in her life. Their relationship embodied the romanticized chaos of rock and roll, wild parties, travel, and a carefree existence. Yet beneath the glamorous surface of their relationship lay significant conflicts. Dean's friends and colleagues noted that Alex often instigated arguments. Her impulsive nature, exacerbated by alcohol and substance use, made their relationship volatile. In September 2013, just weeks before the tragic events involving Forrest Hayes, Alex filed a police report alleging aggression by Dean. However, when officers arrived, they found a very different situation. According to witnesses, Alex had been acting erratically that night. She had consumed too much alcohol, caused a scene at one of the clubs, and physically lashed out at Dean, even biting his finger and leaving visible marks. As a result, Alex herself was charged with filing a false report and assault. This incident highlighted the ongoing strain in their relationship which, despite mutual affection, was unraveling under the weight of constant conflict. A few weeks later, on September 24, 2013, Dean Riappella was found unconscious in his home. Alex called emergency services, reporting that he had collapsed after a long night of partying. She claimed she had stepped into the bathroom briefly, and when she returned, she found him lying on the floor. Paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead at the scene. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was a heart attack brought on by an overdose of prohibited substances. However, this conclusion raised doubts among Dean's friends and family. They insisted that Dean had a strong aversion to using drugs and avoided even basic painkillers. His firm stance on the matter made the official ruling on his death seem inconsistent. Despite their concerns, the case was closed due to a lack of evidence suggesting foul play. Dean's death, initially labeled an accident, resurfaced in 2014 when Alex was arrested in connection with the case of Forrest Hayes. During the investigation, police uncovered similarities between the two incidents. The substances that led to Forrest's death were identical to those found in Dean's system. This discovery prompted the reopening of the inquiry into Dean's death. Additionally, Alex's cryptic posts on social media further fueled suspicions. In one post, shared a few months after Dean's passing, she wrote, "Death is always near. Could be closer than you think." These words sparked widespread speculation, though Alex never offered an explanation or clarification. Dean's family supported the reopening of the case, arguing that the initial investigation had been superficial. They believed Alex's behavior in connection to prohibited substances suggested her possible involvement in his death. However, no concrete evidence was ever found to link her directly to the incident. The parallels between the deaths of Dean Riappella and Forrest Hayes led investigators to suspect that Alex's actions might not have been mere coincidences but part of a larger pattern. Still, despite the renewed focus, Dean's case remains officially closed, and Alex's alleged involvement has never been proven. This ambiguity continues to leave lingering questions that may never be answered. Investigators were able to reconstruct the events of the night Forrest was found deceased, thanks to a combination of evidence, witness accounts, and video recordings retrieved from cameras aboard the yacht. On November 23, 2013, Forrest arrived at the escape in the afternoon, as was his routine, and boarded alone. Shortly afterward, Alex Tillman joined him on the yacht. According to the captain's testimony, Forrest had requested that the crew leave the yacht for the evening, explaining that he wanted privacy and a quiet night to relax. Several cameras on the yacht were still operational. The footage revealed Forrest and Alex in the main cabin, talking, laughing, and drinking wine. Alex had brought a bag with her, which, as later confirmed, contained substances and syringes. As the evening progressed, the conversation became more casual, and Alex retrieved a syringe filled with the substance. She injected herself first, and then offered it to Forrest, who agreed. The camera captured the exact moment of the injection. Shortly after Forrest received the dose, his condition deteriorated rapidly. He lost consciousness and collapsed onto the couch. Initially, Alex didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation. She continued sipping her wine and looking around the cabin. Eventually, she tried to revive Forrest, shaking him by the shoulders, but he didn't respond. Realizing that Forrest wasn't waking up, Alex panicked. Her actions became frantic as she began gathering her belongings, including the syringes and remaining substances, in an attempt to remove potential evidence. She then wiped the wine glass she had used, attempting to remove lipstick marks. Though she missed some, the camera also showed her hastily drawing the curtains in the cabin, inspecting the scene, and ensuring that no clear evidence of her presence remained. Afterward, Alex left the yacht without notifying anyone of what had happened. She left Forrest unconscious, lying on the couch. For the next several hours, no one disturbed him. It wasn't until later, when Forrest's concerned wife contacted the captain, that he returned to the yacht and discovered Forrest's body. The investigation revealed that Alex had tried to disappear after the incident. She turned off her phone and left the marina, likely to avoid detection. However, the yacht's video recordings, along with traces of lipstick on the wine glass, fingerprints and text messages between Forrest and Alex on his phone allowed investigators to piece together the sequence of events. Alex's actions aboard the escape indicated that she was a key figure in the tragedy. Her panicked flight and efforts to remove evidence raised suspicions that she was attempting to evade accountability. However, one critical question remained unanswered. Was the injection deliberate, or was it a reckless decision made in the heat of the moment? Once Alex Tillman was identified as a central figure in the death of Forrest Hayes, law enforcement began a manhunt to locate her. Alex had gone into hiding immediately after the incident, further solidifying suspicions of her involvement. Her phone remained off, and her once active social media accounts showed no updates, making her harder to track. However, investigators devised a plan. They focused on Alex's profile on Seeking Arrangement, the platform through which she had originally connected with Forrest. This app became the key to locating her. Using a fake profile, investigators created the persona of a wealthy man interested in meeting new companions. Despite trying to avoid attention, Alex couldn't resist the opportunity for financial gain and agreed to meet. After several days of messaging, she arranged a meeting at a secluded location in California. When Alex arrived for the meeting, she was apprehended by law enforcement officers. The operation went smoothly. Alex did not resist, but her demeanor was described as indifferent and composed. During the arrest, she stated that she didn't understand the charges against her. However, she was soon formally accused of second-degree manslaughter, evidence tampering, and illegal distribution of prohibited substances. The trial began in early 2014 and quickly became a media sensation. Due to her appearance and controversial past, Alex became the center of public and media attention. Dubbed the beauty-turned-criminal, her photos, past interviews, and behavior were widely discussed. During court appearances, Alex maintained a calm and confident image, often dressed impeccably, which drew mixed reactions from the public. The prosecution argued that Alex was fully aware of the risks of her actions. They presented video footage from the yacht showing her administering an injection to Forrest, and then leaving the scene without offering him any assistance. This, the prosecution claimed, demonstrated her indifference and deliberate attempts to cover her tracks. Alex's defense team contended that she acted at Forrest's request and had no intention of causing harm. Her lawyers asserted that his death was a tragic accident and that her hurried departure was driven by panic. They also emphasized that Forrest himself had requested the substances and willingly consented to the injection. Public opinion was deeply divided. Some saw Alex as a cold-hearted criminal whose actions led to the death of a successful and respected individual. Others viewed her as a victim of circumstance, questioning the ethics of Forrest's behavior, including his use of a dating platform and participation in risky activities. In May 2015, Alex reached a plea agreement with the prosecution. She pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and possession of prohibited substances in exchange for a reduced sentence and avoidance of a jury trial. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison, with credit for time already served. The decision sparked another wave of debate. Some considered the sentence too lenient given the circumstances, while others felt it was fair given the lack of clear evidence of intentional harm. After serving her sentence, Alex was deported to Canada, her country of birth, in 2017. However, her name continued to surface in discussions and articles related to high-profile crimes. To the public, Alex Tillman became a symbol of double lives, risky behavior, and the far-reaching consequences of reckless decisions that led to a tragedy impacting many lives. Upon her release, Alex attempted to rebuild her life. For some time, she stayed out of the public eye, avoiding media interactions and social platforms. However, a year later, she gave her first major interview to a Canadian journalist. Conducted by a video call, Alex appeared calm, composed, and to many, emotionally detached. Her version of the events reignited controversy, sparking new debates over her actions and the consequences that followed. In the interview, Alex stated that she never intended harm toward Forrest Hayes, and that his death had come as a shock to her. She claimed the injection had been administered at his request, and insisted she was unaware of any pre-existing health issues he may have had. According to Alex, she believed that Forrest understood his limits and was in control of his actions. She also denied deliberately trying to cover up evidence, explaining that her actions were driven by panic and poor judgment in the heat of the moment. Her statements, however, conflicted with the evidence presented in the case. Footage from the yacht showed Alex not only removing traces of her presence, but also leaving the scene without attempting to call for help. This raised further doubts about her sincerity and drew sharp criticism from Forrest's family, who labeled her explanations as an attempt to shift responsibility. Equally controversial were her remarks about Dean Riopelli. In the interview, Alex described their relationship as turbulent but genuine, and claimed to have been devastated by his death. However, she avoided answering questions about the cause of Dean's overdose or the circumstances of their final meeting. Her silence only deepened suspicions. Dean's relatives, who had previously called for the case to be reopened, stated that Alex's comments raised more questions than answers. The status of the investigation into Dean Riopelli's death remains unclear. In 2018, the Fulton County District Attorney's Office announced that the case was under review, but no further updates were provided. According to rumors, investigators were unable to uncover new evidence to either confirm or refute Alex's involvement. This left Dean's family in a state of uncertainty and the public awaiting answers. Currently, Alex Tillman resides in Canada and leads a relatively private life. Her social media accounts remain inactive, and journalists' attempts to contact her for further comments are mostly unsuccessful. Despite her low profile, she continues to be a figure of heated debate, dividing opinions sharply. For some, Alex is seen as a person caught in the wrong circumstances, while for others, she is a cold and calculating individual whose actions contributed to two tragedies. The cases of Forrest Hayes and Dean Riopelli leave many unanswered questions. Were their deaths truly accidents? What was Alex's actual role in these tragic events? On April 6, 2009, near Bridgend in South Wales, a truck driver pulled over to the shoulder of National Road A48. Just a few yards from the highway, at the bottom of a small ravine, he noticed an old suitcase partially concealed by tall grass. The unusual placement and shape of the suitcase sparked his curiosity. Deciding to inspect it, he unzipped the bag and was horrified to find a human hand. Shocked by the discovery, the driver immediately contacted emergency services. Kirsty Wilkinson was born on June 19, 1984, in Coventry, England. Her parents, David and Catherine Wilkinson, were already raising two daughters, Kirsty's older sisters, Sonia and Haley. The family enjoyed a close-knit atmosphere, fostering a sense of love and support among all members. Catherine shared an especially warm and trusting relationship with Kirsty. When Kirsty turned 14, the family moved to Bridgend, South Wales. This marked a turning point in her life. The move coincided with her teenage years, introducing new social and emotional challenges. At her new school, Kirsty quickly drew attention for her striking appearance and confident demeanor. Inspired by celebrities she saw in magazines, she began dreaming of a career in modeling. She imagined herself immersed in the world of fashion, surrounded by the spotlight and camera flashes. However, the reality proved more challenging. The modeling industry was highly competitive, and Kirsty struggled to establish a full-fledged career. Her work was limited to occasional amateur photo shoots, which brought little financial stability. Despite this, Kirsty displayed a strong sense of independence, taking on various part-time jobs from a young age. She worked as a waitress, cashier, and even cleaned houses to avoid relying on her parents financially. At 17, Kirsty's circumstances changed dramatically. Facing mounting expenses, she began working at an establishment in Bridgend known for its nightlife and adult entertainment. For Kirsty, this was less of a choice and more of a necessity. She kept this aspect of her life a secret from her family, fearing their judgment. To her mother and sisters, she claimed to work as an administrator for a local business. Using the pseudonym Megan to protect her identity, Kirsty tried to separate this part of her life from the rest of her world. The financial benefits of her new job were significant. She was able to afford her own apartment, cover personal expenses, and even save some of her earnings. However, Kirsty did not take pride in her work. The constant fear of exposure weighed heavily on her, and she struggled with feelings of shame and inner conflict. She longed for a way to leave that chapter of her life behind and start over on a clean slate. Despite her job, Kirsty maintained close ties with her family. Her parents saw her as responsible and goal-oriented, completely unaware of the real source of her financial independence. Kirsty continued to create the illusion of a stable and ordinary life, holding on to the hope that one day she could leave her double life behind and pursue her youthful dreams of normalcy and stability. Paul Grabbitt was born in 1983 in South Wales. His childhood was marked by constant conflicts and financial instability. His parents frequently argued, often neglecting their son, which left Paul with a sense of being unwanted. From an early age, Paul displayed troubling behavior, clashing with teachers and peers and skipping school regularly. His academic performance was poor, and his parents' attempts to discipline him proved unsuccessful. By his teenage years, Paul began showing a tendency toward aggressive behavior. He was frequently involved in fights and was openly disrespectful toward teachers. His reputation at school worsened until he eventually dropped out, leaving his education incomplete. Around this time, Paul developed an interest in prohibited substances. What began as experimentation with mild substances escalated over time to more severe addictions, which intensified his aggression and isolation. At 18, Paul started working in escort services. Seeking funds for his habits, he offered his services to both women and men. This line of work became his primary income source, but came with significant risks. Paul faced threats, aggression, and humiliation, fueling his anger and sense of injustice. This path also drew him into the criminal world, where he formed connections that enabled his destructive lifestyle to continue. Paul's behavior became increasingly hostile. One notable incident involved a dispute with a neighbor whom he accused of damaging his car. Paul not only threatened the woman, but also attacked her with a bat, forcing her to leave the neighborhood. Such incidents were not uncommon, and many people in his community avoided interacting with him. By the time Paul met Kirsty in 2004, he was living an isolated and chaotic life. Escort work, dependency on prohibited substances, and a proclivity for aggression had become central to his existence. His issues with anger management and manipulative tendencies often caused harm to those around him. When Kirsty met Paul, she couldn't foresee how his troubled past would lead to tragic consequences in her own life. In 2004, Kirsty Wilkinson and Paul Grabbitt crossed paths at a party held in one of Bridgen's nightclubs. Kirsty was 20 years old and Paul was 21. Both were at challenging points in their lives. Kirsty continued working at an establishment she kept secret from her family, while Paul was deeply entrenched in substance dependency and survived on a regular income from escort services. Despite their differences, a connection developed between them, initially based on mutual attraction. Their first meeting was purely coincidental. The party was loud, and mutual friends introduced them to one another. Kirsty was drawn to Paul's confidence, while he was captivated by her appearance and charming smile. They spent the evening together, but it didn't lead to any serious commitments. After that night, they kept in touch occasionally but didn't maintain a close relationship. For Kirsty, it was just a fleeting moment in her life with no promise of significant changes. Their connection rekindled at the end of 2007, 3 years after their initial encounter, under unusual circumstances. Paul, as a client, happened to visit the same establishment where Kirsty worked. She was using her pseudonym, Megan, but Paul recognized her and approached her for a conversation. Their initial exchange was awkward, but it soon turned into a friendly chat. Paul mentioned that he had often thought about her since their first meeting and suggested they see each other outside of work. From that point, their relationship began to develop rapidly. They started spending more time together, going for walks and sharing personal stories. Kirsty, who had kept her professional life hidden from those close to her, found in Paul someone who seemed to understand and accept her without judgment. Paul, in turn, displayed confidence and charm, masking the troubled aspects of his past. Kirsty quickly started believing that Paul could be her prince, someone who would help her turn her life around. She was impressed by his talk of wanting to change his life and settle down to start a family. The understanding she thought they shared gave her hope that her life could improve. Paul skillfully fed into this romantic fantasy, often boasting about his alleged achievements, including past jobs as a mechanic, a race car driver, and even a dancer. However, despite the outward appearance of harmony, their relationship was built on half-truths from the start. Paul knew about Kirsty's profession, but kept his true motives hidden. To him, she represented not just a romantic interest, but also a potential financial safety net. Kirsty, on the other hand, trusted in the sincerity of their bond and began to confide in Paul more than she had in anyone else. In December 2007, just weeks after reconnecting with Paul, Kirsty surprised her mother, Catherine, by announcing her engagement. According to Kirsty, Paul had proposed, and she had accepted without hesitation. Kirsty believed she had found the man of her dreams, someone who would embrace her for who she was, despite her secret life. The news came as a complete shock to her family, as none of them were even aware of Paul's existence. Catherine immediately agreed concerns. She felt the relationship was moving too quickly and that Kirsty didn't know Paul well enough. She urged her daughter to delay the wedding to allow more time to understand Paul's character and intentions. Catherine suggested postponing the ceremony for at least a few months, but Kirsty was adamant. She and Paul had already chosen a date, February 2008, just 5 weeks after their engagement announcement. The family's first meeting with Paul only heightened their concerns. When Kirsty brought him home, he made a poor impression. Paul appeared disheveled, dressed casually, and interacted with Kirsty's parents with a noticeable lack of respect. His stories about his life raised red flags. He claimed to have worked as a mechanic, a race car driver, and even a dancer, but none of these claims could be substantiated. It seemed as though Paul was trying to impress them by exaggerating his achievements. However, his tone and demeanor left Kirsty's family feeling uneasy. Kirsty's parents, Catherine and David, tried to dissuade her from rushing into the relationship. They pointed out that Paul seemed unreliable and that their relationship was progressing too quickly. Kirsty's older sister, Sonia, also voiced her concerns, remarking that Paul came across as manipulative. Despite their efforts to convince her otherwise, she firmly believed Paul was her only chance at a happy future. Kirsty had always been a dreamer and a romantic. From a young age, she envisioned a beautiful wedding and a large family. The lifestyle she had been leading left her feeling empty, and she hoped that marrying Paul would mark the beginning of a new chapter. Determined to follow her dream, she ignored all the warnings. She even convinced herself that her loved ones simply didn't understand her feelings. Despite their reservations, Kirsty's family chose to support her on her wedding day. The ceremony took place in February 2008. Her parents and sisters attended, though their smiles masked their unease. Paul, on the other hand, appeared pleased and confident. For Kirsty, it was the day her dreams came true, but for her family, it marked the start of her growing estrangement. They felt she was overlooking the troubling signs that would later lead to tragic consequences. After the wedding in February 2008, Kirsty and Paul began their life together in her apartment in Bridgend. From the outset, Paul imposed his own rules, which quickly escalated into complete control. He moved into Kirsty's home without discussion and immediately took charge of her finances. Paul insisted on gaining access to her bank account, claiming it was necessary to manage their money more effectively. Kirsty, still caught up in her romantic fantasy, didn't object. It soon became evident that Paul had no intention of contributing to their shared well-being. He made no effort to find a job and spent most of his time at home, while Kirsty continued working to support them both. Furthermore, Paul began interfering in her professional life. Instead of discouraging her work, he suggested she take on more clients to increase their income. To him, this was a way to cover their growing expenses, showing no regard for Kirsty's feelings or well-being. Paul's control extended beyond words. He began accompanying Kirsty to her workplace under the guise of ensuring her safety, but in reality to monitor her schedule and ensure she met his demands. Over time, he started finding new clients for her online. Paul created multiple accounts on various platforms, advertising Kirsty's services. As a result, her workload became even more demanding. On top of her shifts at the establishment, she started meeting clients at home. This situation quickly became emotionally devastating for Kirsty. She had long dreamed of leaving her line of work, starting a fresh chapter and building a family. However, under Paul's pressure, those dreams seemed unattainable. Despite her reluctance to continue, Paul used persuasion and manipulation to convince her that this was the only way to maintain their relationship and financial stability. He exploited her sense of responsibility and love for him as leverage. Paul's control was not limited to finances. He also began interfering in her personal life. He demanded explanations for her every move, checked her phone, and forbade her from speaking with certain friends. He insisted that some of them had a negative influence on their relationship. Gradually, Kirsty became isolated, left without support or anyone to confide in. The early signs of Paul's manipulative behavior included his attempts to undermine Kirsty's confidence. He made comments about her appearance, pointing out perceived flaws, and instilled the belief that she couldn't succeed without him. These remarks chipped away at her self-esteem, making her increasingly dependent on him. Paul also exhibited extreme mood swings, shifting from tenderness and care to irritation and aggression, further deepening Kirsty's sense of insecurity. As time passed, Paul became even more assertive. He began introducing others into their personal life under the pretext of adding variety to their relationship. Kirsty was firmly against this idea, but to avoid conflict, reluctantly agreed. However, such situations only deepened her internal turmoil. She began to feel as though her body and life no longer belonged to her. Kirsty tried to maintain the appearance of a family life, but inside, she was consumed by doubt and fear. Paul continued to assert his dominance, completely disregarding her feelings and needs. She frequently recorded her thoughts in a journal, but she lacked the strength to stand up against Paul's growing control. Her life had become a constant struggle to hold on to what little independence she had left, all while enduring relentless pressure and manipulation from Paul. Over time, Paul's controlling behavior escalated into overt aggression. The first instances of physical confrontations occurred a few months after the wedding. One evening, Paul, upset that Kirsty hadn't earned what he considered enough money, started an argument that turned into shoving and striking her. For Kirsty, it was a shocking experience, but Paul quickly apologized, promising it would never happen again. However, his apologies were merely temporary. Soon, these episodes became regular, and the severity increased. Paul began using aggression as a tool to break Kirsty's will. When she refused to comply with his demands, he would escalate from threats to physical actions. One such instance occurred when Kirsty attempted to discuss her desire to leave her job at the establishment. Paul rudely interrupted her, called her ungrateful, and struck her. Afterward, he tightened his control, further restricting her ability to make decisions independently. Kirsty's mother, Catherine, began suspecting that her daughter was unhappy in her marriage. She tried to have an open conversation with her, but Kirsty either avoided the topic or diverted the discussion. Sensing danger, Catherine warned her that Paul could pose a serious threat to her safety. However, Kirsty dismissed these concerns, convinced that she could change the situation with patience. Kirsty's inner doubts grew, but she clung to the hope that things might improve. Her diary entries revealed that she recognized the toxic nature of her marriage, but couldn't muster the strength to leave. Fear of the unknown, feelings of guilt, and her psychological dependence on Paul kept her trapped in a relationship that was steadily eroding her sense of self. On March 28, 2009, Kirsty and Paul decided to spend the evening with friends at a nightclub in Swansea. Throughout the night, they consumed alcohol and other substances, which was not unusual for them. According to witnesses, there were moments of tension between the couple, leading to periodic arguments. Paul appeared irritable, while Kirsty seemed to be avoiding conflict. The night culminated in a heated argument close to midnight, after which Paul left the party and went home alone, leaving Kirsty with their friends. Not wanting to follow him immediately, Kirsty decided to stay and finish the evening with her friends. They later described her as appearing tired and downcast, but trying not to show her emotions. Late that night, Kirsty called a cab to take her home. The taxi driver later stated that he dropped her off at the house, where she confidently walked inside. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. The following day, Paul told Kirsty's mother, Catherine, that his had left early that morning, supposedly taking some belongings and cash. He claimed he hadn't heard anything because he was asleep. Paul also suggested that Kirsty might have gone to see another man. Catherine found his story suspicious, since Kirsty had left behind her bank cards and personal items, an unusual move for someone planning to start a new life. Another suspicious detail came to light when it was revealed that Kirsty had attempted to call emergency services during the night, but the call was disconnected due to a poor signal. Police later discovered that, around the time Kirsty allegedly left, neighbors reported hearing muffled screams and sounds of a struggle. These facts, combined with the lack of any evidence suggesting she left voluntarily, led her family and investigators to suspect foul play. After Kirsty was reported missing, the police immediately launched an investigation. The primary suspect was her husband, Paul Grabit, as his behavior had raised concerns from the start. Paul claimed he had been asleep during the night and noticed the next morning that Kirsty had taken a few belongings and left. However, his version of events didn't align with the facts. Kirsty had left behind her bank cards and other important personal items, which contradicted the idea that she had left intentionally. During the initial search of their home, police noticed some suspicious changes. Part of the living room ceiling had been freshly painted, and a carpet that used to be in the room was missing. Paul explained this by saying Kirsty had wanted to redecorate, but the explanation seemed implausible. Neighbors reported hearing muffled cries, sounds of a struggle, and noise resembling the movement of a heavy object during the night. No one contacted the authorities at the time, assuming it was just a domestic argument. A crucial clue came from Kirsty's failed attempt to call emergency services on the night she disappeared. Investigators determined that the call was interrupted, but the fact that she tried to reach out for help suggested she was in danger. This, combined with the neighbors' testimonies, further heightened suspicions about Paul's involvement. On April 6, 2009, the investigation took a tragic turn. A truck driver, who had pulled over on the shoulder of the A48 near Bridgend, noticed a suitcase lying in a roadside ditch. The unusual appearance of the item caught his attention. Upon opening the suitcase, he discovered a human hand. Horrified, he immediately contacted the police. When officers arrived, they found the body of a woman inside the suitcase. Experts later identified the victim as Kirsty Wilkinson. An examination of the body revealed that Kirsty had suffered severe injuries. Her nose and jaw were broken, and her body showed numerous bruises and scratches. She died from a traumatic brain injury caused by repeated blows to the head. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation, indicating an attempt to asphyxiate her during the altercation. Investigators determined that her body had been moved from another location before being left in the ditch. On the same day, police arrested Paul. During interrogations, he denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of Kirsty's whereabouts after she left. However, his nervous demeanor raised further suspicion. Investigators also discovered that the day after Kirsty's disappearance, Paul used her bank card to withdraw money and visited a massage parlor, actions that appeared highly suspicious under the circumstances. Testimonies and forensic evidence revealed the tragic timeline of the crime. On the night of Kirsty's disappearance, an argument broke out between her and Paul. Paul attacked her, striking her multiple times and attempting to strangle her. After Kirsty's death, Paul moved her body to the living room, where he tried to fit it into a suitcase. Facing difficulties due to the size of her body, Paul initially considered dismembering it, but abandoned the idea, lacking the necessary tools. Ultimately, he managed to force her body into the suitcase and transported it to a roadside ditch where he disposed of it. Later, traces of blood were found in Kirsty's home, which Paul had unsuccessfully tried to clean. Paint stains on the ceiling were discovered, covering splatter marks. These pieces of evidence, combined with witness accounts and Paul's behavior, became crucial in proving his guilt. Kirsty's diary entries further revealed her fear of Paul and her desire to leave, reinforcing the accusations against him. The trial of Paul Grabbit began in early 2010. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline of events based on evidence collected by police and witness statements. Key pieces of evidence included the bloodstains in the living room, which Paul attempted to conceal by repainting the ceiling and removing the carpet. Forensic experts confirmed the blood matched Kirsty's and indicated a violent confrontation. Injuries on her body showed signs of severe aggression. Witnesses, including neighbors, reported hearing sounds of a struggle and muffled cries from the house on the night Kirsty disappeared. A taxi driver confirmed he dropped Kirsty off at her home shortly before her death. Police presented records of Kirsty's call to emergency services that failed due to a poor signal, indicating she had tried to seek help. Another critical piece of evidence was Paul's use of Kirsty's bank card for transactions, including withdrawing money and visiting a massage parlor after her death. During the trial, Kirsty's diary entries were read aloud. In them, she described her fear of Paul, his manipulative behavior, and his aggression. These records painted a picture of a life filled with control, intimidation, and financial exploitation. Prosecutors emphasized how Paul dominated Kirsty's life, disregarding her safety and well-being. Paul denied any wrongdoing, claiming Kirsty left their home voluntarily and suggesting her death was caused by an unknown person. However, his account was contradicted by evidence and witness statements. Investigators also uncovered that Paul had attempted to craft an image of a carefree husband, telling others that Kirsty had run off with another man. After a lengthy trial, the jury found Paul guilty of committing the crime. The judge highlighted the exceptional cruelty of the act, its selfish motives, and Paul's complete lack of remorse. On February 4, 2010, Paul Grabbit was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years. While the sentence brought some relief to Kirsty's family, it could not undo their devastating loss. The trial revealed details about Kirsty's life that her family had never known. They were overwhelmed with grief and guilt, believing they could have prevented the tragedy. For them, the proceedings were not only the conclusion of the case, but also a painful reminder of the devastating impact of toxic relationships and control. After Kirsty's death, the Wilkinson family was left deeply scarred, both emotionally and psychologically. Her mother, Catherine, struggled with a constant sense of guilt. She replayed in her mind all the warnings she had given Kirsty, the words her daughter had ignored, and her gut feeling that Paul was a danger to her. These thoughts consumed her, amplifying the pain of the loss. Kirsty's father, David, withdrew into himself, avoiding any discussions about the tragedy. Losing their youngest daughter shattered the unity of their family. Kirsty's older sister, Haley, was profoundly affected by her death. The two had always been close, and the loss left a void in Haley's life that she struggled to fill. Unable to cope with the growing weight of her depression and feelings of helplessness, Haley turned to alcohol in an attempt to numb the pain. 5 years after Kirsty's death, Haley passed away from alcohol poisoning at the age of just 31. This second tragedy struck the Wilkinson family with another devastating blow, leaving them mourning yet another daughter. For Sonia, Kirsty's other sister, the loss was a harsh lesson on the importance of protecting loved ones. She tried to support her parents but carried her own deep sense of sorrow. The Wilkinson family was left with a wound that no verdict or sentence could heal. The tragedy destroyed their lives, leaving behind a lasting mark that they would carry with them forever. On the evening of October 24, 2009, 58-year-old Chris Marks, a successful, professional, and devoted mother, left her home with a sense of hope. She was on her way to reconnect with her daughter Taylor, who was 20 years old and had been adopted by Chris years earlier. Earlier that day, Taylor had called, asking Chris to pick her up from her boyfriend Brian's house. This request was an unexpected olive branch after a long period of tension between them. Chris arrived at Brian's house around 7 p.m. The neighborhood, located in Akron, Ohio, was known for its high crime rates and general sense of unease. Despite her apprehensions, Chris parked her car, walked to the door, and knocked. Taylor answered, and Chris, struggling to contain her joy, embraced her. There seemed to be no visible tension between them. Shortly after, Brian joined them to escort both women back to Chris's car. To Chris, everything seemed normal, though the area itself left her uneasy. As they walked toward the car, the situation took a turn. A man suddenly appeared behind them, armed with a knife. The attack was swift and brutal. Chris was struck multiple times in the chest and face before she had a chance to defend herself. She collapsed to the ground. Taylor screamed and quickly grabbed her phone to call emergency services. In the recording of her call, she can be heard pleading for help, explaining that her mother had been attacked. While Taylor was on the line with the dispatcher, Brian took the phone from her. He provided their location and described the incident, claiming the attacker had fled. His tone was unerringly calm, lacking the urgency one might expect from someone who had just witnessed such a violent event. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Chris was still alive, but in critical condition. She was transported to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to save her. Despite their efforts, Chris Marks was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The primary cause of death was multiple stab wounds inflicted with alarming force. At the scene, law enforcement quickly noted several inconsistencies. Chris's purse, containing her belongings, cash, keys, and documents, was found untouched near the site of the attack. This detail conflicted with the typical pattern of a robbery. Additionally, a bloodied knife, believed to be the weapon used, was discovered in nearby bushes. These findings raised questions about the accounts provided by the witnesses and suggested the possibility of deeper motives behind the crime. The police began questioning everyone involved: Taylor, Brian, and Brian's friend Troy, who had been inside the house during the attack. Their accounts were inconsistent and contradictory. Taylor claimed she had only seen the silhouette of the attacker, describing someone wearing red sneakers and a flannel shirt. Brian stated that he tried to intervene and even suffered injuries while struggling with the assailant. Troy, however, insisted he had never left the house and claimed he saw nothing. Despite their statements, investigators quickly suspected that none of them were telling the truth. Evidence found at the scene, including blood trails and the placement of the weapon, suggested a staged crime. Authorities believed the attack wasn't random, but instead carefully planned. The first night of the investigation was spent under the intense scrutiny of detectives who were left with one burning question: why would someone target Chris, and which of the people present knew what really happened? Taylor Marks was born on March 29, 1989. Her biological mother decided to place her in foster care immediately after her birth, leaving the infant in the care of the adoption system. Little is known about her biological family, except that Taylor had at least one older sibling, though she was the only one placed in foster care. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter that, despite its challenging start, eventually brought warmth and care. A few months later, Taylor became part of the Marks family, Bruce and Chris Marks. The couple had long dreamed of having a child, as they were unable to have children of their own. When they first saw Taylor, they knew she was meant to be part of their family. At the time, the Marks family was financially stable. Bruce held a senior position at a major telecommunications company, while Chris, known for her organizational skills, managed the household and helped nurture their home life. They had a large and close-knit extended family, and Taylor was embraced with love. Relatives, including grandparents, aunts, uncles, and many cousins, surrounded her with care and support. Bruce and Chris were deeply invested in raising Taylor. She attended prestigious private schools, participated in dance classes, and took part in other extracurricular activities. Her life was filled with opportunities that many of her peers didn't have. Taylor, however, shared a particularly close bond with Bruce. According to family friends, Bruce was her hero dad, always fulfilling her wishes and supporting her unconditionally. Her relationship with Chris, on the other hand, was different. Chris was stricter, more demanding, and practical. While these differences in parenting styles didn't cause significant issues during Taylor's early years, tensions began to emerge as she grew older. During her teenage years, Taylor faced increasing oversight and higher expectations from her mother, which became a frequent source of conflict. The family's dynamic began to deteriorate against the backdrop of growing disagreements. When Taylor was around 10 years old, Chris and Bruce faced marital issues that eventually led to their divorce. According to Taylor, her parents' separation deeply affected her emotionally. She felt that Chris began channeling her frustrations toward her, which further strained their relationship. A pivotal moment in Taylor's life came in 2002 when she was just 13 years old. Bruce passed away suddenly after falling into a diabetic coma. His death was a devastating blow for Taylor, who lost not only her father, but also her strongest source of emotional support. Shortly after, her grandfather, to whom she was also very close, passed away as well. These consecutive losses left Taylor with deep emotional wounds. Following Bruce's death, Chris inherited a substantial estate, including a large sum of money. She used part of the inheritance to purchase a new home in Akron, Ohio, hoping a change of scenery would provide a fresh start for her and Taylor. However, Taylor's emotional state continued to decline. She became more withdrawn, her academic performance suffered, and her conflicts with Chris intensified. Chris tried to support her daughter, but her methods often came across as overly controlling. She attempted to compensate for the loss of Bruce by providing Taylor with material comforts, often going above and beyond to give her everything she needed, and more. However, the emotional connection between them continued to fade. Chris hoped her daughter would eventually take responsibility, finish her education, and one day carry on the family legacy. But Taylor had no interest in these plans, dreaming instead of breaking free from what she saw as imposed expectations. As Taylor entered her teenage years, her quest for independence clashed with her mother's expectations. This marked the beginning of escalating conflicts that only worsened over time. Taylor viewed her mother as a constant source of pressure. With each passing year, tensions grew. Chris tried to enforce strict rules to steer Taylor in what she believed was the right direction. She became increasingly worried about her daughter's declining grades, lack of focus on school, and apparent indifference toward her future. Taylor, however, saw her mother's actions as an attempt to control her life, fueling her desire to rebel. Chris's constant remarks about Taylor's appearance, choice of clothing, and selection of friends only widened the emotional gap between them. The high school years were particularly challenging. Taylor, with access to the privileges her mother provided, began using them irresponsibly. Instead of focusing on her studies, she preferred to spend time with friends, disregarding Chris's attempts to enforce discipline. Although Chris tried various methods to guide her daughter, they only deepened the divide. A critical turning point came in 2008, the year Taylor graduated from high school. Despite Chris's financial support and her willingness to provide opportunities for Taylor to attend any college, Taylor showed little interest in continuing her education. Chris pushed Taylor to at least try, and Taylor eventually enrolled at a university in Akron. However, just a month into her first semester, Taylor dropped out. For Chris, this decision was a major blow, symbolizing the growing distance and the stark contrast between their dreams for Taylor's future. Realizing that persuasion wasn't working, Chris decided to take a firmer approach. She gave Taylor an ultimatum: either get a job and start supporting herself or move out of the house. This was a common expectation in American culture, where young adults are encouraged to take responsibility for their lives upon reaching adulthood. However, Taylor perceived her mother's words not as motivation, but as cruelty and a threat, deepening the conflict between them. The situation escalated further in May 2009, when Taylor met Brian Smith, a 21-year-old with a reputation as a bad boy. Brian lived in a low-income part of town with his mother and sister. Taylor was quickly drawn to him, seeing in Brian a chance to escape her mother's control. Those who knew Brian described him as having a hot temper and a need to dominate in relationships, but these traits didn't deter Taylor. Chris was strongly opposed to the relationship. She was concerned not only about Brian's behavior, but also about the influence he might have on her daughter. Chris attempted to forbid Taylor from seeing Brian, and even banned him from coming to their home. However, these actions only solidified Taylor's resolve. Before long, Taylor packed her belongings and moved in with Brian, leaving her mother's house. Life with Brian was far from the ideal Taylor had imagined. At first, their relationship seemed promising, but it didn't take long for Brian to begin displaying controlling and aggressive behavior. Taylor faced jealousy, control, and frequent outbursts of anger. Despite this, she refused to return home, seeing a move back as an admission of defeat. Concerned for her daughter, Chris continued to provide support. She purchased essentials for Taylor and maintained contact, hoping her daughter would come to recognize her mistakes. The tension between them reached a breaking point when Chris offered Taylor a lifeline. She could come home under the condition that she either resumed her education or found a job. Chris even proposed additional support, offering to provide her with a car, an apartment, and a position at her company. Yet, Taylor showed little interest in these opportunities. Her tumultuous relationship with Brian continued despite the mounting challenges. Chris held on to the hope that time would help Taylor see the error of her ways. She believed that one day her daughter would return home and take on more responsibility. Unfortunately, this hope would never come to fruition. The growing rift in their relationship, compounded over the years, set the stage for the events that would ultimately lead to a tragic outcome. Taylor's move to Brian's home marked the beginning of what she believed to be long-awaited freedom. However, that freedom quickly turned into a series of restrictions. Life with Brian proved far different from her expectations. He imposed strict rules and monitored every aspect of her life. Taylor, accustomed to a certain level of comfort and independence, found herself in an environment where she was expected to comply with Brian's every demand. Brian's control over Taylor soon became all-encompassing. He checked her phone, read her messages, and tightly monitored her movements. Even her communication with Chris became a point of contention. Brian convinced Taylor that her mother was merely trying to manipulate her and prevent her from living life on her terms. His words deepened the already growing divide between Taylor and Chris, who continued to reach out, determined to keep the open. In Brian's home, Taylor found herself in complete isolation. Brian not only restricted her social connections, but also manipulated her emotions, portraying himself as the only person who truly understood her. During arguments, he displayed aggressive behavior, breaking objects and making threats. His outbursts were often followed by demands for total loyalty and constant reminders of her dependence on him. The situation was further complicated by the involvement of Brian's family. His mother, Tammy, chose not to intervene, effectively enabling his behavior. His younger sister also played a role in maintaining control over Taylor, acting as a watcher when Brian wasn't around. This created an environment where Taylor's every move was closely monitored. Taylor's financial ties to her mother were another critical factor in her relationship with Brian. Aware of Chris's wealth and Taylor's potential inheritance, Brian was determined to maintain control. He frequently reinforced the idea that her mother was the root of all her problems, further driving a wedge between them. Under Brian's influence, Taylor began avoiding contact with her mother. Even when Chris visited to help her daughter, Brian remained distant and dismissive. He discouraged Taylor from accepting her mother's support, insisting they could handle things on their own. Despite Brian's efforts, Chris continued to provide for Taylor, buying her necessities and urging her to come back home. By the summer of 2009, the tension between Taylor, Brian, and Chris had reached a breaking point. After months of living with Brian, Taylor had become entirely dependent on his influence. Amid increasing control and aggression, an idea began to take shape, something that initially seemed far-fetched but soon became a concrete plan. This idea was fueled by mounting pressure, mutual dissatisfaction, and financial motives. The plan was to remove Chris permanently, thereby gaining access to her assets. For Taylor, this seemed like a way to sever the last ties connecting her to her mother while also achieving financial independence. For Brian, it was an opportunity to solidify his control over Taylor and use her inheritance to improve his own circumstances. The idea of committing a crime began circulating within their inner circle. Brian's 19-year-old friend, Troy Purdy, who frequently visited their home, became involved in these discussions. Younger and impressionable, Troy was seen as an ideal participant in the plan. Initially, the conversations were framed as jokes or hypothetical scenarios, but over time they became more serious. The planning progressed slowly with careful attention to every detail. Brian and Taylor deliberated on how to stage the crime to look like a robbery or random attack. They decided that evidence left at the scene should point to an act of spontaneous aggression rather than a premeditated crime. Troy was chosen to carry out the act, distancing Taylor and Brian from any direct connection to the incident. Troy's involvement was based on his loyalty to Brian. He respected Brian and didn't question the plan when approached. In exchange for his role, Troy was promised $5,000, money that Taylor expected to receive from her inheritance once the legal processes were complete. Special attention was given to selecting the weapon. According to Taylor, Brian's mother, Tammy, even purchased a knife for the plan, but it was later deemed unsuitable due to its size and weight. Ultimately, Troy took on the task of finding an appropriate weapon. He chose a lightweight knife that was easy to conceal and carry. A critical part of the preparation involved studying Chris's routines. They knew Chris often visited Brian's house to see Taylor, making her vulnerable since she usually came alone, believing she was simply picking up her daughter. This detail was incorporated into the plan. The scenario envisioned Chris arriving at the house with the attack occurring as she exited the home or near her car. Just before the plan was set in motion, Taylor made the final move to ensure everything went as intended. She called her mother and asked her to come pick her up, saying she wanted to come back home. This phone call was designed to disarm Chris emotionally, giving her a sense of relief and lowering her guard. Throughout the discussions, Taylor showed no hesitation. According to Troy, she was not only an active participant in the planning, but also displayed a strong determination to see it through. Despite her strained relationship with her mother, taking such a drastic step was extreme. Taylor justified her involvement by citing years of built-up resentment and her desire to escape her mother's control. Brian, meanwhile, guided the process, convincing Taylor that this was the only way to resolve her problems. By the evening of October 24, 2009, everything was ready. Taylor knew the plan was moving from theory to action. She remained calm and focused, believing this was the only path forward. For Chris, this day seemed like the start of reconciliation with her daughter. For Taylor and Brian, it marked what they saw as the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. October 24, 2009, began as a typical day for Chris Marks, but ended in tragedy. That evening, Taylor called her mother and said she wanted to come home. For Chris, this unexpected phone call was a moment of joy. After months of tension, she saw it as an opportunity to reconnect with her daughter. She quickly gathered her things, got in her car, and drove to Brian's house, unaware she was walking into a meticulously planned crime. Chris arrived around 7 p.m. She parked her car near the house and walked to the front door. Taylor greeted her with a smile and hugged her, making it appear as though this was the first step toward reconciliation. Brian followed them out of the house, observing the scene from behind. As planned, Troy stayed inside to avoid drawing suspicion. Chris and Taylor began walking toward the car, with Brian trailing slightly behind, as though escorting them. It appeared to be a routine interaction, but everything changed in an instant. As the two women approached the car, Troy emerged from the house holding the knife. The attack began suddenly and without warning. Chris had no time to react. Troy struck her multiple times in the chest and face. The assault was swift and ferocious, leaving no opportunity for her to defend herself. Chris fell to the ground, having sustained more than 10 stab wounds. This was not a robbery. It was a targeted act of aggression meant to eliminate her. Taylor stood nearby watching the attack unfold. She later claimed her inaction was due to fear of Troy. However, surveillance footage discovered later showed no signs of panic or distress on her part. Brian also remained passive, stating that his role was merely to protect the women, yet he did nothing to stop Troy. Once the attack was over, Taylor picked up her phone and called emergency services. Her voice sounded tense as she begged for an ambulance to be sent immediately. However, the phone was soon taken by Brian, who assumed the role of coordinator, providing the dispatcher with details about the location and the type of assistance needed. His voice was calm and devoid of emotion, raising suspicions among law enforcement officers who later reviewed the call. Troy, after completing the attack, discarded the knife in a nearby bush and fled the scene. Later he claimed he acted in a moment of emotional distress, but the evidence suggested his actions were carefully planned. Chris was rushed to the hospital, but despite the medical team's efforts, she could not be saved. She succumbed to multiple stab wounds inflicted with evident fury. Following the tragic death of Chris Marks, the investigation began immediately. Police arrived at the scene just minutes after the call to emergency services. The evidence they found: a knife in the bushes, Chris's purse with all her belongings intact, and the absence of any signs of robbery, immediately raised doubts. The theory of a random attack didn't align with the details. The first step for investigators was to question those involved: Taylor, Brian, and Troy. They were interviewed separately to prevent any chance of coordination. Their accounts, however, were inconsistent and unconvincing. Police quickly noted discrepancies in their statements. The key piece of evidence came from surveillance footage captured near the crime scene. The video showed Taylor and Brian standing nearby as Troy attacked Chris. Neither of them made any attempt to intervene. These recordings became a decisive turning point. Armed with this evidence, detectives revisited the suspects for further questioning. Under the pressure of the evidence, Troy was the first to confess. He admitted that the attack had been premeditated and claimed Taylor was the mastermind behind the plan. According to Troy, she had approached him and Brian with the idea, promising a financial reward from the inheritance she would receive after her mother's death. Troy revealed that his role was to carry out the attack, while Brian was responsible for creating an alibi by making it appear like a robbery. Troy also admitted that he had intentionally inflicted minor wounds on Brian to make the staged scenario more believable. His confession completely dismantled Taylor's earlier claim that the attack was a random event. When Brian learned of Troy's confession, he altered his account as well. He corroborated Troy's statement that Taylor had initiated the plan. However, Brian denied being an active participant, claiming that while he didn't approve of the attack, he felt powerless to stop Taylor and Troy. He also insisted he was unaware of the full details of the plan until the last minute, though this seemed like an attempt to downplay his involvement. Confronted with mounting evidence and accusations, Taylor initially continued to deny her role. However, her version of events became increasingly inconsistent. Investigators noted that she began to contradict herself, and her behavior suggested she was attempting to hide the truth. Eventually, under the weight of the evidence, Taylor admitted to discussing the plan with Brian and Troy. The investigation uncovered numerous details that highlighted the deliberate nature of the crime. The participants meticulously planned every aspect, from choosing the weapon to staging fake injuries. The financial motive, cited by both Troy and Brian, became a central component of the prosecution's case. Taylor admitted that her ongoing conflict with her mother was a driving factor in her decision. However, she claimed she didn't anticipate the situation escalating to such a tragic outcome. Just 5 hours after the crime, police had a comprehensive understanding of what had happened. Taylor Marks, Brian Smith, and Troy Purdy were arrested and charged in connection with the death of Chris Marks. While this concluded the initial phase of the investigation, the legal process was just beginning as the court would determine their levels of culpability and issue sentencing. The trial for the crime involving Chris Marks began in late 2009. The defendants faced significant public scrutiny due to the brutal nature of the crime and the involvement of people close to the victim. The prosecution built its case on a wealth of evidence, witness testimony, and video recordings. The most compelling piece of evidence was the surveillance footage showing Taylor and Brian standing by and making no effort to intervene during the attack on Chris. Additionally, Troy's confession, which detailed the conspiracy and his role in the crime, became a cornerstone of the case. Investigators also presented text messages found on Taylor's phone, where she had discussed her strained relationship with her mother and expressed a desire to be free of her. The financial motive was further supported by evidence of the substantial inheritance Taylor expected to receive after Chris's death. During the trial, it was revealed that Chris had significant assets, including real estate, a business, and substantial savings. Defense attorneys for Taylor, Brian, and Troy sought to mitigate their client's culpability. Taylor's defense argued that she was under Brian's significant influence and lacked the autonomy to act independently. Her lawyer claimed that the emotional instability caused by her father's death and the pressure from her mother made her vulnerable to manipulation. Brian, on the other hand, denied active involvement in the crime. His attorney argued that he was unaware of the plan until the attack occurred and was paralyzed by shock, unable to intervene. Meanwhile, Troy, despite his initial confession, attempted to partially change his story during the trial, claiming that he acted under pressure from Brian. During the proceedings, Troy agreed to a plea deal with the prosecution. In exchange for admitting his guilt and testifying against the other defendants, he received a sentence of life imprisonment without parole, avoiding the possibility of the death penalty. Taylor, realizing the hopelessness of her situation, also pled guilty. During the hearings, she delivered an emotional statement expressing remorse for her actions. She explained how her conflicts with her mother and Brian's influence had driven her to participate in the crime. However, prosecutors argued that her involvement was deliberate and calculated. Brian, in contrast, initially denied his guilt but eventually admitted his role when confronted with irrefutable evidence. He maintained that his involvement was minimal and that he had not intended for the crime to occur, but the court viewed this as an attempt to downplay his responsibility. In 2010, the court delivered its verdicts. Taylor Marks and Brian Smith were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Both received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Taylor expressed remorse for her actions, but her claim that she had lost control was seen as an attempt to mitigate her sentence. Troy Purdy, as agreed in his plea deal, also received life imprisonment. However, his behavior in prison later drew attention. In 2015, he was charged with possession of a weapon within the facility, raising questions about his ability to reform. After the sentences were announced, the lives of everyone involved in the tragedy were irrevocably changed. The family of Chris Marks not only lost a mother but also a daughter, who was complicit in her death. The story became a sobering reminder of how personal conflicts and impulsive decisions can destroy even the closest relationships. Taylor, sentenced to life without parole, was sent to a women's correctional facility in Ohio. During her first years in prison, she remained withdrawn, avoiding contact with the press and other inmates. However, in 2021, Taylor gave an interview to a television program about her case. In the interview, Taylor acknowledged the severity of her actions but continued to justify her decisions by citing her conflict with her mother and her emotional instability. Despite her earlier expressions of remorse in court, Taylor reiterated criticisms of her mother, describing her as strict and unsupportive after her father's death. She also mentioned her hope of one day having her case reviewed and being granted a chance at freedom. Her statements sparked controversy, with many interpreting them as a lack of genuine remorse. Taylor now spends her days participating in rehabilitation programs and working within the prison. Her claims of repentance remain polarizing. Some view her as manipulative and insincere, while others see her words as an attempt to find meaning in life behind bars. Brian, also sentenced to life in a high-security prison, has maintained a low profile since his conviction. He has avoided interviews and has not spoken publicly about his role in the crime. According to prison staff, Brian has a reputation as a difficult inmate, prone to conflicts and aggression. His name resurfaced in 2017 when it was reported that he had been involved in a fight with another inmate. The incident underscored that his tendencies toward aggressive behavior had not diminished, even after his sentencing. Like Taylor, Brian remains a symbol of the tragic failure to take responsibility and the devastating influence one can have on others. Troy, who played a direct role in the crime, was also sent to a high-security prison. Despite his plea deal, his behavior behind bars demonstrated a lack of change. Troy has rarely been mentioned in the media since the incident. While his participation in the crime was viewed as the result of manipulation by Brian and Taylor, his willingness to deliver the fatal blows raised doubts about his capacity for rehabilitation. The memory of Chris Marks lives on among her friends and surviving family members. Her senior care business was sold after her death, with part of the proceeds donated to charities supporting victims of domestic aggression. Her relatives and friends have often described Chris as a strong and compassionate woman who dedicated her life to helping others. Years after Chris's death, her story continues to serve as a cautionary tale about the importance of open communication within families and seeking professional help when conflicts spiral out of control. Early in the morning on May 26, 2018, a staff member at a boarding school dormitory stumbled upon a scene that shocked everyone. In the stairwell of the girls' residence, the lifeless body of 17-year-old Charnel Hogg was found hanging near the railing. Just minutes later, authorities discovered a second victim, her best friend Marna Engelbrecht. At first glance, everything pointed to a double tragedy, but subtle inconsistencies in the details began to surface. What initially appeared to be a heartbreaking loss soon evolved into a chilling and complex investigation that uncovered hidden facets of lives entangled in tension, obsession, and threats. Charnel Hogg lived on a farm in Delaryville, a small town in the northwest province of South Africa, with her father Ronnie, her stepmother Anna, and Anna's son Eston, whom she regarded as her brother. Charnel's parents divorced when she was young but remained on amicable terms. Her father was a cattle farmer, while her mother, Sonia, worked in a tourism lodge in a nearby resort area. Before enrolling at Stella boarding school, Charnel split her time between her parents, spending 3 weeks on the farm with her father and 1 week with her mother. However, after starting school, her visits to her mother's home became less frequent. This change in Charnel's routine coincided with an unexpected reunion and rekindling of her friendship with Marna Engelbrecht. The two girls had been close friends since early childhood, but their bond had faded after Charnel moved. The Stella school environment brought them back together. Their families had shared deep connections for years. Marna's mother, Ryanette, had played music at Charnel's parents' wedding. Both families, rooted in farming traditions, often crossed paths at Sunday services and community events. Charnel and Marna's friendship had blossomed during their kindergarten years and remained strong until life circumstances pulled them apart. The Northwest Province, where both families lived, was a rural area dominated by agriculture. Its landscape consisted of savannas and shrublands, and most residents earned their livelihoods through farming. Descendants of 17th century European settlers, known as Afrikaners, maintained a traditional way of life, even as their influence waned following the end of apartheid. This cultural continuity bonded the Hogg and Engelbrecht families, reflecting their shared heritage and values. 8 years after their childhood separation, fate brought Charnel and Marna together again at Stella boarding school. Both girls enrolled in 8th grade, and their friendship quickly rekindled. For Charnel, the boarding school, located in a small town far from her farm life, represented a significant shift from the familiarity of her family to the independence of boarding school life. Her father, occupied with managing the farm, and her mother, living at a distance, were no longer as present in her daily life. In this new environment, Charnel's friendship with Marna became an essential source of support and comfort. In March 2017, Charnel Hogg first noticed Xander, an 18-year-old graduate of the same boarding school she attended. He caught her attention with his athletic build, thick dark hair, and striking green eyes that complemented his confident demeanor. Although Xander had already graduated, he maintained ties with the local community and frequently visited areas near the boarding school. His family had a complicated history. His parents, Monty and Marcia, divorced when he was still young. Xander lived on his father's farm, located about 50 miles from Stella, but occasionally visited his mother, with whom he shared a less close relationship. Before Xander entered Charnel's life, her days were filled with shared interests and adventures alongside her best friend, Marna Engelbrecht. The two bonded over their love for animals and horseback riding, a hobby that remains central to their lives. Charnel also had a passion for photography and dreamed of turning it into a career, though her father, Ronnie, believed she had the potential to pursue modeling. Marna, a diligent student with a knack for math and science, aspired to become a veterinarian, inspired by her childhood experiences on the family farm. Marna lived with her parents near the town of Ryburg. Her father, Stefan, was a well-respected drilling specialist who shared a close bond with his younger daughter, affectionately calling her Marna Thinker for her calm and thoughtful nature. Her mother, Rhianette, worked as a caregiver, while her older sister, Rhianne, played a significant role in the family dynamic. Marna's family was known in the community for their close-knit relationships, and their life seemed harmonious and stable. The two friends shared a dorm room at the boarding school and spent most of their free time together. Charnel was known for her charisma, while Marna stood out for her intelligence and kindness. On weekends, they often returned to their respective homes, but occasionally stayed with one another's families. Ronnie, Charnel's father, treated Marna as if she were his own daughter, and both families shared warm and supportive ties. While the girls' lives appeared full of happiness and stability on the surface, this facade hid a far more complex reality. Xander, who had recently entered Charnel's life, carried a troubled past. The divorce of his parents and challenges during his childhood had shaped not only his outward confidence, but also an underlying tension within him. Xander's mother, Marcia, had always seen him as a special child. After enduring multiple heartbreaking struggles to become a mother, she gave birth to him despite a difficult pregnancy fraught with complications. His early health challenges only strengthened their bond, and Marcia became a highly protective and devoted mother, even as Xander grew older. In contrast, his father, Monty, a former police officer, raised Xander with strict discipline, instilling in him a love for sports, hunting, and outdoor activities. From a young age, Xander joined his father on fishing trips, shooting practice, and forest outings, which became integral to their time together. Despite his strong physical build, Xander had a complicated personality. During his school years, he was known for his success in rugby, but his temper often led to conflicts. Disagreements with teachers, arguments with classmates, and even confrontations with adults were common. His parents were frequently called to school meetings, but Marcia always defended her son, insisting that his behavior was just a way of expressing his individuality. After graduating, Xander decided not to pursue further education and began helping his father on the farm. His presence on social media was minimal, mostly limited to photos of firearms and hunting trophies highlighting his hobbies. Despite leading a relatively private life, his charisma and good looks drew attention, particularly from young women. It was at a school event that Charnel first took notice of Xander. Alumni, including Xander, had been invited to meet with current students. Their initial interaction was brief, but mutual attraction quickly led them to spend more time together. Charnel, then a senior in high school, was captivated by his confidence, athletic physique, and charm. Their relationship developed rapidly. In the first few weeks, Xander showered Charnel with attention, doing everything he could to make her happy. He came across as a caring and devoted partner. Later, when it was time to meet her family, Xander was eager to make a good impression. The meeting with Ronnie, Charnel's father, went better than expected. Initially cautious, Ronnie soon appreciated Xander's interest in farming. Xander's offer to help with farm work ultimately won him over. These moments marked the beginning of their shared story. However, beneath the surface of harmony, Xander's personality traits hinted at potential future challenges. His fiery temper and resistance to compromise had already surfaced in the past, and the impact these traits might have on the relationship was only a matter of time. Marna was the first to notice changes in Charnel's behavior. The friends she used to spend so much time with began avoiding her and communicating less often. At first, the changes were subtle, but they grew more apparent with each passing month. Charnel frequently found excuses to avoid meeting Marna or their other friends, citing busyness or fatigue. Marna noticed that these changes were connected to Xander and tried to gently inquire about what was happening. However, Charnel insisted that everything was fine. These changes began after Xander fully immersed himself in Charnel's social circle. At first, Xander's control seemed subtle. He often asked who she was spending time with and what she was doing, which Charnel interpreted as care and concern. Gradually, he started demanding access to her phone, social media accounts, and messages. Charnel complied, thinking his jealousy was a reflection of his deep feelings for her. The situation came to a head during preparations for prom. Charnel, accompanied by her mother, went shopping for a dress. What should have been a joyful moment turned tense when Xander got involved. He insisted on approving her choice of dress and even dictated that she wear minimal makeup and style her hair in a way he deemed acceptable. Wanting to avoid conflict, Charnel went along with his demands. She later confided in an uneasy but didn't fully recognize the gravity of the situation. Xander's controlling behavior continued to escalate. He began interfering in her friendships, openly disliking anyone he felt was a bad influence. If Charnel spent time with friends, he demanded detailed explanations. Over time, she started limiting her social interactions to avoid arguments. Even with Marna, her closest friend, their meetings became rare. Marna tried to talk to Charnel, pointing out that Xander's behavior was unacceptable. However, Charnel reassured herself and others that these were just temporary challenges, stemming from Xander's personality. She believed he would change, but his control grew tighter, and his behavior became more aggressive. Even during family dinners with his relatives, Charnel noticed how closely Xander monitored her words and actions. Initially, Charnel's family, including Ronnie and Anna, approved of the relationship, but as time went on, they began noticing changes in her demeanor. She seemed less confident and more withdrawn, though they attributed it to academic stress. Only Marna saw the deeper issue and tried to reach out to her friend. However, Xander's influence continued to grow, leaving Charnel increasingly isolated. In January 2018, Charnel Hoag decided to end her relationship with Xander. This decision had been building for some time, as his behavior had become increasingly controlling and aggressive. By the end of the previous year, Charnel's family and friends began noticing the intense pressure he was placing on her, including constant monitoring of her phone and social media, as well as heated arguments where he would physically assert his dominance. Occasionally, marks left on Charnel after these confrontations raised alarm among those close to her, particularly Marna. The breakup triggered an extreme reaction from Xander. He began threatening to harm himself, claiming he couldn't live without her. These threats were accompanied by frequent messages in which he manipulated her emotions, hoping she would reconsider. Despite the stress this caused, Charnel stood firm this time. Her decision to leave the toxic relationship was final. During this period, Marna, Charnel's best friend, became entangled in the conflict. Xander accused her of turning Charnel against him and began sending Marna insulting and threatening messages. Alarmed, Marna confided in her father Stefan. He immediately intervened, contacting Xander and demanding that he stop the harassment. While this temporarily de-escalated the situation, Xander's hostility didn't disappear entirely. A few months after the breakup, Charnel began spending more time with Brandon Victor, a longtime friend she had known since she was 14. Brandon, a high school senior with an excellent reputation, was known for his kindness and athletic accomplishments. He provided Charnel with much-needed emotional support, listening to her and helping her cope with the lingering pressure from Xander. Their friendship gradually developed into a closer relationship, but they chose to keep it private, knowing that Xander still exhibited an unhealthy obsession with Charnel. Even after the breakup, Xander refused to let Charnel move on. He stalked her, showing up unexpectedly in places she frequented, and continued sending her messages. This behavior made Charnel and Brandon cautious. They avoided public places where they might encounter Xander and kept their relationship discreet to avoid provoking him further. May 2018 marked a turning point. Despite her efforts to reclaim her peace of mind, Charnel continued to feel the weight of Xander's persistent interference. His refusal to accept her decision and his ongoing attempts to involve himself in her life created a tense and increasingly volatile atmosphere around her and those close to her. Resolving the situation would require decisive action as the pressure continued to mount. Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, an unusual stillness hung over the boarding school dormitory. A staff member, Crystal, began her day around 6 a.m., walking through the hallways to check if students were awake. As she passed by the restroom, something caught her attention: dark strands of hair on the floor. At first, she assumed it was just leftover hair from brushing and didn't think much of it. However, As she approached the staircase leading to the ground floor, she noticed a green nylon rope tied tightly across the railing. Moments later, Crystal froze in her tracks as she saw a pair of feet in white socks dangling above the floor. A few hours earlier, at approximately 4:17 a.m., Sonia, Charnel's mother, woke up at her home in Costa to find a troubling message from her daughter. The text read, "Mom, I just wanted to say I love you and I'm sorry." The misspelling of the word sorry caught Sonia's attention immediately, as Charnel was always careful with her grammar. Alarmed, Sonia tried calling her daughter, but the call went straight to voicemail. Worried, she called her ex-husband, Ronnie, to ask if he had heard from Charnel. Ronnie, who had been asleep, reassured Sonia that everything had seemed normal the night before, but he decided to check his phone. Among the late-night messages from Charnel, two stood out, leaving him deeply unsettled. The first message, sent at 3:42 a.m., included a photo of Charnel in her undergarments and a caption that read, "I love you, Brandon." The second, sent at 4:17 a.m., said, "Dad, I'm sorry, Marna and I are leaving." The cryptic and troubling nature of these messages made Ronnie fear for the girl's safety. He immediately contacted the school's principal, Richard Hobson, to report his concerns. Meanwhile, Crystal, trying to piece together what was happening, went upstairs to Charnel and Marna's room. It was empty. The girls' personal belongings were neatly arranged, as if they had been preparing for the next day without a hint of distress. At that moment, Crystal realized the situation was far more serious than she initially thought, and returned to the staircase where she had spotted the rope. At the same time, the worrying messages were reaching the girl's parents, and Brandon, Charnel's boyfriend, also received a late-night text from her. The message was unexpected, and his immediate attempts to call her went unanswered. Although Brandon didn't fully understand what was happening, he began to sense that something was terribly wrong. The morning, which was supposed to start with preparations for a rugby match, quickly descended into chaos. Rumors about a serious incident spread rapidly among the students, and by the time Ronnie and Sonia arrived at the boarding school, desperate to find out what had happened, the atmosphere was tense and filled with uncertainty. Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, Richard Hobson, the headmaster of a boarding school, received a frantic call from Crystal, one of the dormitory supervisors. Her voice was tense and panicked as she explained that she had discovered the body of Charnel Hogg, one of the students, hanging from the staircase railing in the dormitory building. Stunned by the news, Hobson attempted to get more details, but the call abruptly ended as Crystal dropped the phone and ran to find help. Meanwhile, Charnel's father, Ronnie, learned of the tragedy through a brief call from the school's principal. The message was devastating. Both Charnel and her friend Marna had been found dead. Overwhelmed and desperate for answers, Ronnie contacted his brother, Louis, to accompany him to the school. As they drove, Ronnie replayed the strange late-night messages he had received from his daughter, trying to make sense of the situation. At the school, Hobson and staff worked quickly to shield the students from the horrifying scene. By the time police arrived in the morning, they discovered not only Charnel's body hanging from the staircase, but also a second body, that of Marna, found in the first-floor bathroom. A strap from a backpack was tightly fastened around her neck. Initial police assumptions that the two girls had chosen to end their lives were soon challenged. Investigators noted that the marks on their necks were inconsistent with the signs typically seen in such cases, raising suspicions of foul play. As police examined the scene, Ronnie arrived at the school and rushed toward his daughter's body hanging from the railing. Officers tried to stop him, warning that disturbing the scene could compromise evidence, but Ronnie, overcome with grief, ignored their pleas. It was only with Louis's help that Charnel's body was eventually taken down. At the same time, Marna's father, Stevens, also arrived at the school. Upon seeing his daughter, he was overcome with anger and immediately declared that this was no accident. He voiced his suspicion of Xander, Charnel's ex-boyfriend, whom he believed could be involved. Amid the chaos at the school, Principal Hobson decided to call in private investigator Chris Sanders, a professional he had worked with before. Sanders arrived within hours and began gathering information. One of the first people he interviewed was Brandon Victor, Charnel's current boyfriend. Brandon revealed that he had received messages from her during the night but couldn't fully understand their meaning. He also shared that Xander had continued to display an unhealthy obsession with Charnel and had made threats against her after their breakup. The investigators collected enough evidence to suspect the involvement of a third party. The rope found on the staircase and the backpack strap around Marna's neck were carefully analyzed. Fingerprints on these items were considered critical in determining what had occurred. Xander's name came up repeatedly in conversations among students, prompting Detective Sanders to identify him as the primary suspect. Meanwhile, Stevens, Marna's father, grew impatient with the pace of the investigation. Taking matters into his own hands, he went to Xander's home to confront him and demand answers. This action threatened to escalate the situation, potentially creating further complications for the investigation. Around midnight on May 25, 2018, Charnel, Marna, and Brandon were sitting in the girls' dormitory room. Brandon had sneaked in, violating strict school rules, to comfort Charnel, who was feeling increasingly uneasy due to threats she had been receiving from her ex-boyfriend Xander. They drank coffee and talked, but Charnel's tension became more apparent as the night went on. At 1 a.m., Charnel's phone rang. It was Xander. She put the call on speaker so Marna and Brandon could hear the conversation. At first, Xander spoke calmly, trying to persuade her to come outside and meet him. When she refused, his tone shifted dramatically. He began making threats, ending the call with a chilling warning. "You'll regret what I'm going to do tonight." Charnel was visibly shaken. Brandon offered to stay with her, but she insisted he return to the boys' dormitory, fearing punishment if his presence was discovered. Around 2 a.m., Brandon left. It was the last time he saw the girls alive. The following morning, on May 26, after learning about the deaths of Charnel and Marna's father, Stevens, went to Xander's home, determined to get answers. Arriving at the farm, he confronted Xander and his father, Monty. In his grief and anger, Stevens accused Xander of being involved in the tragedy. The confrontation quickly escalated into a heated argument, which was interrupted by private investigator Chris Sanders, who had just arrived on the scene. Displaying a calm demeanor, Sanders convinced Stevens to step back and persuaded Xander to accompany him to the police station. On the drive there, Sanders began questioning Xander, applying steady pressure. Eventually, Xander broke down and confessed to the crime. He admitted that he had killed Charnel out of jealousy and then murdered Marna to eliminate a witness. Sanders recorded the confession on a voice recorder. At the scene, police were already collecting evidence. The marks on the girls' bodies and the circumstances surrounding their deaths pointed to foul play, and Xander's confession aligned with investigators' suspicions. After arriving at the station, Xander repeated his account of the events. During questioning, Xander detailed how he had planned the crimes, intending to stage them as voluntary acts to avoid suspicion. He described sneaking into the dormitory and carrying out his actions. Investigators also uncovered disturbing evidence of his obsession with Charnel: messages, photos, and journal entries stored on his phone. At Xander's trial in March 2019, his behavior and motives became the central focus. One of the most critical pieces of testimony came from Anastasia Fesser, an acquaintance of Xander's from fishing competitions. She recounted a phone call she received from him the day before the tragedy, during which he angrily declared that he wouldn't let Charnel live her life without him. His chilling statement about making her life unbearable now stood out as a direct warning of what was to come. Anastasia admitted that she hadn't taken Xander's words seriously at the time, dismissing them as an emotional outburst. However, looking back, she regretted not reporting his comments to the police or warning anyone close to Charnel and Marna. Her testimony became a crucial part of the trial, shedding light on Xander's obsession and the premeditated nature of his actions. During the trial, Brandon Victor, Charnel's new boyfriend, provided key testimony. Brandon recounted how, on the evening of May 24, 2018, he secretly snuck into the girls' dormitory to spend time with Charnel and Marna. They talked, laughed, and discussed recent events, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. However, their evening was interrupted by a call from Xander. Charnel put the phone on speaker so Brandon and Marna could hear the conversation. At first, Xander spoke calmly, trying to persuade her to meet him. When she refused, his tone became threatening, ending with a chilling statement that she would regret her decision. After the call, Charnel was visibly frightened, but insisted that Brandon return to the boys' dormitory, worried they'd get in trouble if anyone found out he was there. This decision marked the last time Brandon saw Charnel and Marna alive. The following day, police discovered their bodies, setting off the investigation that ultimately led to Xander's arrest. The defense attempted to challenge the validity of the evidence, arguing that Xander's confession had been coerced. However, testimony from private investigator Chris Sanders and recordings of Xander's statements dismantled their argument. Psychological evaluations described Xander as emotionally unstable, with a pathological fixation on Charnel. His jealousy, obsessive need for control, and inability to cope with their breakup were identified as factors leading to the tragedy. The role of Xander's family also came under scrutiny. His mother, who had been overly protective of him since childhood, had consistently defended him, disregarding concerning behavior. Initially, his father, Monty, a former police officer, acknowledged his son's guilt and stated that justice needed to be served. However, after the sentencing, which included 2 life terms, Monty reversed his position, accusing the legal system of being unjust and hiring lawyers to appeal the verdict. For the families of Charnel and Marna, there was some comfort in knowing the 2 inseparable friends were now laid to rest beside each other. This case highlights the importance of recognizing hidden issues in interpersonal relationships and taking proactive steps to prevent tragedies. It also raises questions about the role of upbringing and emotional support in shaping an individual's character and how unresolved emotional struggles can lead to devastating outcomes. On the side of a deserted road in the state of Morelos, the lifeless body of a young woman was discovered. The passers-by who found her immediately contacted emergency services. The body lay motionless, her clothing appeared wrinkled and stained, and her skin showed visible signs of bruising and abrasions. No documents or personal belongings that could help identify her were found nearby. For the authorities, this marked the beginning of an investigation to shed light on what had happened and uncover the circumstances of this tragedy. Ariadna Fernanda Lopez Diaz was born on July 5, 1995, in one of the underprivileged neighborhoods of Mexico City. Her childhood was shaped by limited resources, but it was not devoid of warmth and care. Her family consisted of her mother and her older brother Omar. Despite the absence of a father figure who showed little interest in his children, the small family held together through mutual support. Omar became a role model and protector for Ariadna, offering her unwavering encouragement. Their close bond instilled in Ariadna a sense of security, knowing there would always be someone she could rely on. Ariadna was known for her warm and approachable personality, which made her popular among her peers. She had a natural ability to make friends and stood out for her sincerity and willingness to help others. Her school years were filled with the company of close friends, with whom she often shared her dreams about the future. However, her youth was marred by a profound loss. In 2018, when Ariadna was just 23, her mother was diagnosed with cancer. The illness progressed rapidly, and soon the family had to face the inevitable. Losing her mother was a devastating blow to both Ariadna and Omar. This tragedy not only strengthened their bond, but also forced Ariadna to mature quickly and take responsibility for her own life. In memory of her mother, she had her name tattooed as a permanent tribute, ensuring her mother's presence remained with her always. Before the loss of her mother, Ariadna had met a young man and soon entered into a relationship with him. Their romance moved quickly, and before long Ariadna learned that she was expecting a child. However, the arrival of her son did not bring the stability she had hoped for. The young couple soon realized their paths were diverging. After parting ways, they maintained a neutral relationship, jointly caring for their son. Becoming a mother brought new challenges. Ariadna had to balance the demands of parenthood with the search for work to provide for herself and her son. Her first step in this journey was a job at a popular bar in Mexico City. This establishment, frequented by affluent clients, had strict expectations for its staff. Here, Ariadna honed her ability to interact with a wide variety of people. Despite the difficulties, she excelled in her role, drawing on her charisma and strong work ethic to navigate the challenges she faced. The pandemic brought significant changes to her life. Losing her job due to the closure of the establishment where she worked, Ariadna refused to give in to despair. Instead, she used this period to pursue a long-held dream, opening her own beauty salon. This project became a symbol of her determination and desire to build a life independent of external circumstances. Drawing on her experience and extensive network, she successfully launched a business that provided her with a steady income. During this time, a new relationship entered her life. She met a man with whom she quickly connected. This relationship became a source of joy and stability for her. Ariadna balanced her time between her son, her work, and her partner. Her days were busy, but she managed it all, finding happiness in each new opportunity. By the age of 27, Ariadna's life resembled a completed puzzle, where every challenge and every achievement contributed to a picture of resilience and success. She had endured loss, rebuilt her life from scratch, cared for her son's future, and achieved independence. However, what seemed like the start of a happy chapter turned out to be the prelude to a tragedy. Ariadna met Vanessa through mutual acquaintances. Their interaction began at an event where Ariadna had gone with her friends. Vanessa immediately caught Ariadna's attention. Young, vibrant, and charismatic, Vanessa had a way of quickly connecting with people. However, those who knew her well had mixed feelings about her. Behind her apparent openness lay sharp edges, and her actions often surprised people with their unpredictability. Rodel, a middle-aged businessman, was a frequent presence in Vanessa's social circle. His reputation was shrouded in rumors. Known for his wealth, influence, and lavish lifestyle, he was often seen in the company of young women who sought to be part of his world. His status was bolstered by whispers of connections with powerful figures and even criminal networks, yet no one in his circle could confirm these suspicions. Rodel avoided direct conversations about his past and business dealings, but his demeanor inspired both respect and unease. Though Ariadna was intelligent and independent, she didn't immediately recognize how different her new acquaintances were from her usual circle. Vanessa, eager to impress, often boasted about her connections with influential people, including Rodel. She painted him as someone capable of solving any problem. Gradually, Ariadna began spending more time with them. Vanessa seemed genuinely captivated by Ariadna and went out of her way to gain her trust. Rodel, learning about Ariadna through Vanessa, quickly took an interest in her. At their first meeting, he impressed her with his attentiveness and conversational skills. His charm and confidence were undeniably appealing, and Ariadna was no exception to his allure. However, behind this charm was a more complex personality. Those who had dealings with Rodel noted his manipulative tendencies. Ariadna, however, saw him as a courteous and kind man. Vanessa continued to play a key role in strengthening the connection between Ariadna and Rodel. She frequently invited Ariadna to gatherings where Rodel was present, creating an atmosphere of trust and openness. However, over time, peculiar details began to surface. For instance, some of Ariadna's friends warned her to be cautious around these people. A few were aware of Rodel's questionable reputation and Vanessa's unpredictable nature. They hinted that these relationships could pose hidden risks. Despite the warnings, Ariadna didn't perceive any danger in her new social circle. She saw her friendship with Vanessa as an opportunity to take a break from her daily responsibilities and explore a world that had previously been out of reach. Rodel, on the other hand, worked to win her over by demonstrating generosity and friendliness. His invitations to dinners and parties seemed interesting and harmless to her. As we know, Ariadna was in a relationship with a young man. However, this didn't stop her from maintaining friendships and occasionally accepting invitations to social events. Based on available information, her partner was a trusting person and didn't express dissatisfaction with her social interactions. Over time, Ariadna began to notice that her new connections were starting to influence her life. Vanessa frequently called her, suggesting meetups and planning outings for leisure. Rodel, meanwhile, increasingly tried to solidify his presence in Ariadna's life, often offering help and support in various situations. Without realizing it, Ariadna was gradually becoming immersed in their world, unaware of the potential consequences. On October 30th, 2022, Ariadna accepted an invitation from Vanessa to spend the evening with friends. The gathering was set to begin at Fisher's, a popular restaurant located in downtown Mexico City. Vanessa assured her that it would be a cozy evening with a relaxing dinner and good company. Rodel was also expected to join, which gave Ariadna a slight sense of unease. Despite her growing reservations about him, she didn't want to strain her friendship with Vanessa and decided not to decline. The group came together later that evening. The restaurant, known for its trendy clientele and upscale interiors, provided a lively backdrop for the gathering. The atmosphere at the table was light-hearted and festive. Wine, cocktails, and an array of appetizers added to the celebratory vibe. As usual, Rodel made himself the center of attention, sharing stories and raising toasts. He interacted confidently with the waitstaff and went out of his way to showcase his influence. Vanessa supported him, adding jokes and commentary to keep the conversation flowing. The other guests followed their lead, trying to match the energy of the evening's hosts. Ariadna's behavior stood out amidst the lively atmosphere. She didn't appear completely at ease, frequently checking her phone, reading messages, and typing out responses. Her gaze often lingered on Rodel, as if she were searching for some hidden meaning in his actions or words. Vanessa made efforts to distract her, pulling her into conversations and encouraging her to try another cocktail, but Ariadna remained reserved. Her expression revealed that something was troubling her more than the setting around her. Midway through the evening, Ariadna posted a cryptic message on her social media. "Would you miss me if I disappeared?" This post sent a ripple of concern among her close friends and family, though many in her broader circle dismissed it as a joke. However, those who knew Ariadna well noted that she had never written anything like this before. The post left an uneasy impression, though no one could have predicted it would be her last. As the evening went on, the group decided to move to Rodel's house. The suggestion came from Rodel himself, and Vanessa enthusiastically supported the idea, saying it would allow them to continue the evening in a more private setting. Ariadna hesitated, but eventually agreed after Vanessa urged her to join. The rest of the group followed suit, piling into Rodel's car for the short drive to his home. Rodel's house, located in an upscale neighborhood, underscored his status. The interior featured a modern design with luxurious touches. Upon arrival, the group settled in a spacious living room. The night continued with music and drinks, but Ariadna seemed increasingly uncomfortable. She stepped away several times, checking her phone and pretending to make calls. Her distant and focused demeanor didn't go unnoticed. Vanessa, observing this, began whispering with Rodel, which only heightened the tension. Closer to midnight, Ariadna announced that she wanted to head home, citing fatigue. Vanessa, however, convinced her to stay a little longer, suggesting they could leave in about half an hour. Rodel, unusually quiet at that point, occasionally glanced at Ariadna in a way that added to her unease. As the evening wound down and the other guests started leaving, Ariadna remained one of the last to depart. Tragically, no one from the group would see her alive again. The following morning, on October 31st, 2022, an event shook the community in Morelos. Two cyclists on an early morning ride stumbled upon a woman's body lying on the side of a remote road. The area was far from any major highways, in a location rarely frequented by locals. The surroundings emphasized the tragedy: desolate terrain, sparse bushes, and an unsettling silence. The woman was clothed, but her attire was dirty and appeared damaged. Her body showed multiple bruises and what looked like contusions. Witnesses immediately reported the incident to law enforcement, who arrived several hours later. In the meantime, the cyclists took photos of the scene to document the setting and potentially aid in identifying the victim. When the police arrived, they quickly cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence. Tire tracks were found in the dirt, along with marks suggesting the body had been moved. Forensic specialists noted clear signs of a struggle, but the initial cause of death was unclear. No visible weapon-related injuries were found, making it difficult to determine the exact circumstances of the tragedy. At the time, the woman's identity remained unknown, as no documents or personal items were found with her. Hours later, photos of the body began circulating on social media, sparking widespread discussion. Among those who saw the images were friends and family of Ariadna, who had been missing since attending a gathering at Rodel's house. Recognizing distinctive features of the victim, including tattoos, her brother Omar feared the worst. He filed a missing person report with the police and suggested that the woman found might be his sister. Meanwhile, the state authorities in Morelos launched their investigation. However, the initial response from the police faced heavy criticism. Evidence collection protocols were reportedly violated, and critical traces at the scene were poorly documented. This raised doubts about the integrity and professionalism of the local law enforcement. When Ariadna's relatives arrived to officially identify the body, their fears were confirmed. Omar recognized his sister by a tattoo on her shoulder that was a tribute to their late mother. For the family, it was a devastating shock, further compounded by the condition of her body. The bruises and injuries on her face and arms clearly indicated a violent incident. However, the police's official statements at the time provided little clarity and sounded unconvincing. The family's immediate response was a call for justice. They began demanding a transparent investigation and accountability for those responsible. That same day, they reached out to friends active on social media to bring attention to the case. What started as a small campaign quickly gained traction, drawing in thousands of people. Despite the mounting public pressure, the Morelos police maintained that the death might have been the result of an accident. They stated that further investigation would depend on the completion of a forensic examination. This stance only fueled more questions and deepened suspicions that influential individuals might be involved in covering up the truth. The first people investigators contacted were Rodel and Vanessa, as they were the last to see Ariadna alive. Their statements formed the foundation of the initial theories about what might have happened. In his initial account, Rodel claimed that after the party, Ariadna decided to leave his house by calling a taxi. He stated that she seemed a little upset but didn't show any signs of serious distress. According to him, he walked her to the door and she left, heading to an unspecified location. Vanessa supported his story, adding that Ariadna had indeed left in a taxi and hadn't mentioned her destination. However, inconsistencies in their version quickly raised suspicions. The first red flag was the lack of any evidence confirming a taxi ride. Neither Rodel nor Vanessa could provide the driver's contact information or any proof to back up their statements. Investigators later discovered that although several taxi calls had been logged in the area near Rodel's house that evening, none of the drivers reported picking up Ariadna. The second issue involved Vanessa's behavior. Her account shifted depending on the questions asked. Initially, she insisted that Ariadna had left alone. Later, she added that they'd had an argument during the party, which could have upset Ariadna. Moreover, Ariadna's told police that Vanessa had messaged them, attempting to suggest that Ariadna might have harmed herself, referencing the cryptic social media post Ariadna had made earlier that evening. The post, shared just hours before Ariadna's disappearance, had indeed raised questions. While her family and close friends initially dismissed it as a joke, investigators began to suspect it might reflect her true emotional state that night. Another troubling factor was Vanessa's increasingly erratic behavior. Her messages to Ariadna's friends showed that she was trying to downplay the situation and avoid providing details. In one text, she admitted she was afraid of being suspected, but didn't explain why. These signs further heightened investigators' suspicions that Vanessa might be withholding critical information. The initial findings of the investigation were inconclusive regarding the exact circumstances of Ariadna's death. However, subsequent efforts by law enforcement and independent experts unearthed crucial evidence. These findings were based on 2 autopsies, surveillance footage, and text messages recovered from the suspects' phones. The initial forensic report conducted in the state of Morelos claimed that Ariadna's death was caused by asphyxiation related to bronchial aspiration. The examiner suggested that food and alcohol in her airways might have led to her passing. However, this conclusion was immediately questioned by Ariadna's family. They pointed out the numerous bruises and injuries on her body that the report failed to adequately address. Despite the official findings, her family insisted on a second examination. Under pressure from the public and the family, Ariadna's body was sent to an independent forensic institute in Mexico City for further analysis. The results of the second autopsy completely contradicted the initial conclusions. Experts found multiple injuries, including head trauma, bruises, and evidence of physical force on her arms and legs, suggesting an attempt to defend herself. These findings confirmed that her death was not accidental or merely related to alcohol. Her passing was classified as the result of violent actions, prompting authorities to reclassify the case as a criminal act. Crucial to the investigation were surveillance videos obtained from the parking garage of Rodel's residence. One video showed Rodel carrying Ariadna's lifeless body to his car the morning after the party. The footage also captured him loading her body into the vehicle and leaving the premises. These recordings became indisputable evidence tying him to the movement of the body and its subsequent concealment. After investigators seized the phones of Rodel and Vanessa, they uncovered messages discussing their actions following the party. The texts revealed attempts to coordinate their stories for law enforcement and justify their behavior to Ariadna's friends. Vanessa expressed anxiety over the pressure from Ariadna's family, while Rodel reassured her that everything was under control. One message even contained detailed instructions on how to answer questions in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion. In Vanessa's conversations with Ariadna's friends, she repeatedly suggested that Ariadna might have been struggling with emotional distress, hinting at the possibility of self-harm. This narrative contradicted statements from Ariadna's friends, who described her as a cheerful and vibrant person with no signs of such tendencies. These inconsistencies further deepened suspicions about Vanessa's involvement. The evidence, results from the second autopsy, surveillance footage, and recovered messages, painted a clearer picture of what had happened. Investigators concluded that the initial claims of an accidental death or Ariadna voluntarily leaving Rodel's home did not align with reality. The evidence clearly pointed to the violent nature of Ariadna's death and the subsequent concealment of her body. These findings became the foundation for charges against Rodel and Vanessa, who would soon face trial for their actions. Vanessa was the first to be arrested. Investigators discovered that she had been in constant communication with Rodel in the days following the crime, discussing ways to evade responsibility. Her arrest took place under intense public scrutiny. During her initial interrogations, Vanessa claimed she had no involvement in Ariadna's death, but her statements were riddled with contradictions. Vanessa insisted that she had gone to bed early on the night of the incident and was unaware of what transpired afterward. However, a fact check of her claims revealed inconsistencies. Text messages showed she was fully aware of what had happened and had discussed the details with Rodel. Investigators also determined that Vanessa actively destroyed potential evidence by deleting photos, messages, and other incriminating information in an effort to obscure her involvement in covering up the crime. Realizing the mounting evidence against him, Rodel chose to turn himself in to authorities. Accompanied by his lawyers, he proclaimed his innocence, stating that he did not harm Ariadna but panicked and attempted to hide her body out of fear of the consequences. According to his account, he found Ariadna unresponsive in his home the morning after the party and, believing she had passed away, decided to dispose of the body to avoid suspicion. However, his version of events raised serious doubts. First, the results of the second autopsy confirmed a violent cause of death, contradicting his claims. Second, surveillance footage showed him carrying the body with clear attempts to hide his actions rather than seeking help. Additionally, his text conversations with Vanessa revealed a coordinated effort to agree on false narratives about what had happened. As the investigation progressed, alarming information surfaced about potential corruption involving Rodel and the prosecutor's office in Morelos. The initial autopsy report, conducted in the state, had deliberately omitted references to injuries that clearly indicated violence. Activists and Ariadna's family accused the prosecutor of using their position to shield Rodel from accountability. These allegations ignited public outrage. Officials in Mexico City launched a review of the Morelos prosecutor's actions, and an internal affairs division opened an inquiry into possible misconduct. Some witnesses alleged that Rodel had connections to criminal groups, which might explain his confidence in avoiding punishment. The case gained widespread attention, becoming a symbol of systemic issues within the justice system and highlighting the role of public pressure in pursuing justice. Further interrogations and collected evidence confirmed that at least one of the suspects knew more about the events of that night than they were willing to admit. However, neither Vanessa nor Rodel accepted direct responsibility, instead focusing their statements on mutual attempts to justify their actions. Their behavior only heightened suspicions and was a key factor in their temporary detention. The motives and circumstances surrounding the tragedy that unfolded that night became the subject of a lengthy and meticulous investigation. Uncovering the truth required a careful reconstruction of events, analysis of evidence, and a close examination of the behavior of everyone present at the party. Gradually, a clearer picture began to emerge, pieced together from conflicting testimonies, technical data, and psychological profiles of the suspects. That fateful evening began at a restaurant in downtown Mexico City, where Ariadna, Vanessa, and Rodel, joined by mutual friends, enjoyed dinner and drinks. Outwardly, everything seemed ordinary. Laughter, conversation, and music, but subtle details hinted at underlying tension. According to witness statements and an analysis of text messages, Ariadna appeared unusually quiet and preoccupied. She frequently checked her phone, sending messages and answering calls, behavior that was uncharacteristic for her at social gatherings. This detail became critical later in the investigation. Her messages revealed that she had been texting a close friend, expressing unease about the party and concerns about some of the attendees. After leaving the restaurant, the group headed to Rodel's house. The property, surrounded by high walls and equipped with security cameras, was a frequent venue for private gatherings. Vanessa and Rodel acted as the hosts, but their dynamics seemed tense. Witnesses noted that Vanessa made several sharp remarks toward Ariadna, which the latter received with composure, trying to avoid confrontation. As the night progressed, alcohol began to influence the group's behavior. Vanessa, already emotionally charged, reportedly raised her voice multiple times, accusing Ariadna of being disrespectful and unfriendly. These accusations didn't resonate with others in the group but added to the escalating tension. Rodel, meanwhile, appeared to remain neutral but was visibly uncomfortable with Vanessa's behavior. A pivotal moment came early the next morning, when witnesses reported seeing Ariadna attempting to leave the party. She was briefly seen outside the house but returned shortly afterward. Investigators determined that, during this time, Vanessa continued to confront Ariadna, leading to an open conflict. While the exact details of the altercation remain unclear, investigators suspect that Vanessa accused Ariadna of drawing too much attention from Rodel. Messages retrieved from the phones confirmed that Vanessa and Rodel had discussed tense moments from that night. After most of the guests had left the party, only a few people remained in the house, including Vanessa, Rodel, and Ariadna. According to investigators, Vanessa, who was reportedly heavily intoxicated, began displaying aggressive behavior. It was during this time that an incident is believed to have occurred, resulting in the fatal injuries sustained by Ariadna. Why did Ariadna post such a strange message on social media that night? Initially dismissed as a joke, the post took on a different meaning as the investigation unfolded. Friends later confirmed that Ariadna may have felt uneasy due to Vanessa's behavior and the overall atmosphere at the gathering. The post might have been a way to express her discomfort, attract attention, or perhaps even serve as a subtle warning. The reconstruction of events suggests that Vanessa's jealousy, exacerbated by alcohol and emotional instability, played a central role in the tragedy. Rodel, likely attempting to cover up what had happened, only worsened the situation with his actions. This combination of factors led to the devastating outcome, which might have been avoided if the party's environment had not been so tense and volatile. Ariadna's 6-year-old son was left in the care of her older brother Omar. As the only father figure in the boy's life, Omar stepped in to provide not only financial but also emotional support. He took on the responsibility of raising his nephew, striving to preserve memories of Ariadna and surround him with the love she had always given during her life. This decision brought the family closer together, as other relatives and friends also contributed to helping the boy cope with his loss and providing him with a nurturing environment. Ariadne's family remained active in the fight to uncover the full truth about her death. They organized protests, launched social media campaigns, and garnered public attention. A significant achievement was drawing the focus of international media, which helped increase pressure on the Mexican judicial system. The preliminary court hearings regarding Ariadne's death became a pivotal moment in the pursuit of justice. Despite resistance from certain authorities, the family and their legal team ensured that the case was handled transparently, with all relevant evidence considered. Each step of the investigation and trial was closely monitored by the public and the media, leaving little room for any facts to be hidden or distorted. The trial began with a focus on the roles of Rodel and Vanessa. During court proceedings, prosecutors presented key evidence, including surveillance footage, phone call records, and data from text messages. These materials demonstrated not only the suspects' involvement in concealing the body, but also their potential role in the violent actions that led to Ariadne's death. The defense attempted to challenge the evidence, arguing that the tragedy was an unfortunate accident. However, numerous testimonies and forensic analyses cast significant doubt on that version of events. One of the central objectives of the trial was to determine the motives behind the crime. Witnesses familiar with Vanessa described her as impulsive and prone to aggressive behavior, which was often exacerbated by alcohol. Rodel, on the other hand, was portrayed as someone with a questionable past and alleged ties to criminal networks, raising additional concerns about his involvement in the events of that night. While the defendants denied responsibility for Ariadne's death, their statements were inconsistent with the evidence, further fueling suspicions. A verdict in Ariadne's case has not yet been reached, as the investigation and court proceedings remain ongoing. Based on the evidence gathered, prosecutors have filed charges for her death, with the case potentially classified as femicide, a crime involving gender-based violence, which is considered an aggravating factor under Mexican law. If convicted, both defendants could face up to 70 years in prison. If you're still here, I hope tonight's story helped you drift off, or at least kept you wondering. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you're already asleep, well, sweet dreams. This was Sleep Crime Stories. See you in the next case.